Good morning, everybody. We'd love to have everybody's attention. Thank you for being here. We are about to get started. I'm Jonathan Dworkin with New Deal. We've got a great program lineup for you today. Really excited. And of course, we start with our leader, New Deal CEO, Debbie Cox Bolton. Join me in welcoming Debbie.
Good morning, everybody. So nice to see you all. I am Debbie Cox Bolton, CEO of the New Deal, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to the 14th annual, can you believe it, New Deal Leaders Conference. We had such a great night last night. It was so fun to celebrate the successes, to hear from Governor-elect Matt Meyer in Delaware, New Deal leader, to talk about being inspired by his inspiration and inspired by the work that he's excited to keep doing. And I said when I spoke last night that we were going to spend last night just reconnecting, talking to each other, being together in community. And then today we were going to turn to the hard work of talking a little bit about what happened in the election and where we go from here. So that's what we're going to do. And I know that we are gathering here in a time that we all hoped would not happen, that in fact we all worked very hard not to happen. So I'm sure, like me, many of you are still reeling and still wondering what this means for you and your constituents, and we have a lot of work to do. I'll be honest, for me on election night, I actually had a moment where I didn't know if I could keep doing this. I said, I'm not sure I can stay in politics. I had to talk to our staff in the morning, a lot of young folks, people who were understandably just kind of stunned about what happened and have to explain to them what happened. And it was hard. I couldn't get through that conversation without crying. But the next day, like many of you, I woke up, I dusted myself off, and I said, you know, I looked inside for that kernel of resilience, and I found it. And it's been growing ever since. And what I want to tell you, in all honesty, is that my kernel of resilience is fueled by all of you. It really is. I'm so inspired and I'm so motivated by the fact that you get up every day, the New Deal leaders and other elected officials in this room, and you fight for your constituents. You put them first. You say, no matter what is happening, I'm going to keep doing this. And the courage that you show just to raise your hand and run for office shows such a compassion for this country and for your fellow Americans. I just don't want you to lose sight of that as we go through what is undeniably going to be some tough times. I just want to say that we do know that it is going to be, actually before I go there, I do want to also say it's not just the elected officials in the room. We have people here who are not elected officials, and to you being here, the work that you do every day is also a sign that you're not giving up, that we're all in this together and we're just going to keep going. We all do know that the next 4 years are going to be very hard, probably some of the hardest we've ever faced, and your jobs are about to get even harder than they were. There will be people who are hurt. There are funds that are going to be cut. There are programs that are going to be cut. The rule of law and the democratic institutions and government itself is going to be tested like never before. And there's nothing to suggest so far that the new administration has any interest in pulling our country together, appealing to our better natures, and thinking about how to heal our community. So that means that we need you more than ever. The job that you do is more important than ever. We're going to need you, particularly the leaders at the state and local levels, to hold this administration accountable. We're going to need you to stick up and stand up for your vulnerable residents. And importantly, as we're going to talk about today, we need you to lend your voices and, in fact, to lead the effort to rebrand the Democratic Party. Going forward, we have to start with an honest conversation about what happened. There are lots of reasons for our loss. Sure, there was a global movement against parties in power after COVID. Disinformation, the broken media system, this all contributed to what happened. And we had certainly a very unusual 100-day campaign that none of us could have predicted. And the vice president ran a really good campaign. She did everything she could do. But at the end of the day, while the margins were close, voters rejected the Democratic brand in favor of a deeply flawed, deeply unpopular candidate. There's no doubt that President Trump is overstating the mandate that he thinks he has and will undoubtedly overreach for sure. But we still have to live with the fact and come to grips with the fact that we lost ground with voters in nearly every state and in nearly every demographic. This election actually should put to bed the conversation that's been going on a long time about whether demographics are destiny. So moving ahead, I think it's time for us to be really humble. We've got to really listen, and we've got to learn. We need to figure out how to put together a much broader coalition than the people we were talking to by offering a common sense agenda grounded in values that most Americans share on the issues that matter most to them. So at New Deal, we started that effort of listening and learning, where we always do with all of you. We engaged Sam Youngman, a former journalist, to talk to a number of you about what happened in your states and your communities. We asked you what went wrong, what went right, and where we go from here. So I encourage you all to check out the report. Hopefully, maybe you can do that there, in its entirety. But I wanted to just share a few of those highlights with you. So when we asked leaders what went wrong, what we heard was that across the country, voters felt like Democrats were not focused enough on the single most important issue, which was the high cost of living. Immigration, as one interview put it, was an albatross around Democrats' necks. And the way that Democrats too often think about and talk about the electorate in a very well-meaning and well-intentioned way to segment up the population by smaller demographic groups and talk to them about what we're going to do for them, actually in doing so, left too many people feeling like if they didn't hear their name listed, that they were not welcome in our coalition. We're going to have to figure out going forward how we stay true to our value of inclusivity, which is the right value, but do it in a way that doesn't alienate a lot of people. The new ways that people consume information, the proliferation of media, disinformation, that's here to stay. And Democrats are going to have to figure out how to talk differently and how to reach people where they are. When it comes to what went right, there were a lot of bright spots, and a lot of those we talked about last night. So 2 New Dealers won races for governor, making to 3 the number of Democratic governors who are New Deal leaders, Matt Meyer in Delaware and Josh Stein in North Carolina. New Deal alum Ruben Gallego and Angelo Alsobrooks won seats in the U.S. Senate, and a number of other, of course, Senate candidates, Democratic Senate candidates, held on to their races and overperformed the top of the ticket. Our friend Tobias Reed won for Secretary of State in Oregon. And 5 New Deal leaders won congressional races, including in really tough swing districts like Kristen McDonald-Rivet in Michigan's 8 and Janelle Bynum in Oregon's 5. And additionally, 100% of New Deal leaders who are running for re-election, 75 of them, won their re-election. So congratulations to all of you. So in the context of where we find ourselves at the top of the ticket, we asked these successful New Deal leaders what they did, what were the lessons we could learn from their wins. They talked about focusing like a laser on common sense ideas, using common language. They talked about being authentic and connecting to their constituents, and building broad, big tent coalitions that welcomed people who did not agree with them on every issue. They said that it was very hard to paint a caricature or have disinformation stick when people know who you are. They say, I hear what they're saying about Democrats, but I know that person. That's not what that person's about. We've got to learn from that and take something away for that nationally. When asked where we go from here, New Deal leaders led with listening. Doing more listening than talking, going everywhere and talking to everyone, being open and respectful to those who disagree with us. And importantly, I think as we go forward in the next 2 and 4 years, telling Democrats what we stand for and not just what we're against. It's going to be very easy to say what we're against in the next 4 years. And I think we need to be thoughtful to that point and strategic about how we take on the Republicans. So again, I hope you'll read the full thoughts of New Deal leaders. I think it's very insightful, and we'll be talking more about this as we go forward in the next 2 days. We're also, as we continue that conversation about politics, we're going to do what we always do, which is to come back, roll up our sleeves, and talk about the work. We're going to talk about how we tackle affordable housing and how we build an inclusive economy that works for everyone. Because at the end of the day, sharing ideas and solving problems, talking about how to make government work better and to deliver results, that's what New Dealers do. That's who we are. So our work continues. In fact, it's more important than ever. I want to thank you for being here. You continue to give me hope. We're so grateful for you. And together, we will do this together. We are going to be okay, and we are going to prevail. So thank you very much for being here this morning. So we have a super exciting addition to our program today. We are going to sneak in some comments from somebody I am just absolutely thrilled is here, and that is Congressman Pat Ryan. Many of you may know Congressman Ryan. He won a very hard district in New York that he won the first time by 1% and the second time by 13%. I think he has a lot to teach us. If you are following him on X, if you're not, you should. He had a really amazing kind of post-election analysis about what went right and what Democrats can learn from that. And I'm so thrilled that he agreed to stop by and spend a few minutes with us. Congressman Pat Ryan.
Oh, hey, good morning, everybody. Good morning, everybody. All right. I was not expecting to see you all, so I was here for another smaller discussion. But hello. I'm mostly here to be the warm-up act for Pete Buttigieg. I heard he's coming, so I'm just his hype man, one of the many. I was not a New Deal leader. Much to my sadness, I missed that opportunity. But I know of the phenomenal work that many of you individually do. I've gotten to meet actually many of you over the last few years in my travels. I'm a huge fan, Debbie, of what you've done and built. And the two things that I just wanted to say, number one, I'm a recovering county executive. Any county executives in the room? Okay, we got one, all right. So I come from local government. I believe that the really solution to all the things, frankly, happening in our party and in our country and our politics, and the lack of trust in government is literally in this room. And I know it's cliche, but seeing what I saw and the ability to build trust from the bottom up when I was a county executive, I only had a small county of about 200,000 people, but led it through the pandemic, and I know a lot of you have led through that crisis and those challenging times. And even in the midst of all that, we were actually able to grow and build and bolster trust. So that leads me to the second thing that I wanted to say to you all and really ask of you all. I've only been in Congress 2 years. I'm finishing my first term. It is a shit show, fully, as you all know and see. We really need your voices. Individually and collectively, there is very little, I hate to be negative, but I have very little hope that Congress and the national leadership are going to figure out how to get us out of the devastating losses that we had. And I have tremendous confidence and optimism, truly, that the individuals and the collective brain power in this room, you all know, you already know the answers, and you already know how to do this. And many of you, I've seen several of you already on social media and in other platforms speaking up already in the sort of 2 weeks since the elections. So please do not feel like there's somebody else that is going to figure this out. I'm telling you, there is no one on Capitol Hill that is going to figure this out, myself included. Please, whether it's privately, publicly, on social media, if you want, I can happy to share my contact and number, but please just leave here feeling not just empowered, but honestly a duty and a responsibility to raise your voice and speak up, even if it's not 100% right. And I put out, and I'll just close with this, I was pissed after these elections and sad and all the range of 7 stages of emotion that we were all feeling. And I just wrote what to me felt like a rant, a Twitter thread, which I don't normally do. And it got like 3 million views, and that is not normal for my boring Twitter and social media. And there's some things I said in that I maybe would tweak a little bit now that I'm rereading it, but I was in a stage of a lot of emotion. But that's what we need. I'm telling you, that's what we need right now. We don't have to get it all right, but we need to put our hearts and all out there. And I'm very, very optimistic, actually, that if we do that individually and collectively, we're going to get through the next few months and years here. So thank you so much for having me, and I hope you have a great conference. And I'm actually heading back to my district after this, so that makes me very, very happy. And I hope you all have a great rest of your morning and day. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Congressman Ryan. I mean, really spoke to me, the duty and the responsibility we all have, and the really important point that we don't always have to get it right. We just have to do our best. So I really appreciate those remarks. It is my great pleasure to introduce our next speaker. That is Lene Erickson. Many of you know Lene. She's the Senior Vice President for Social Policy and Politics at Third Way. She's a great friend of New Deal. We are super excited and thrilled that Third Way, can I say waited? I don't know. Waited or rushed or something to get their polling done so that they could share their findings about the election first with New Deal leaders. And so we're so grateful. Lene is a wonderful communicator. The thing I love most about your bio is that she loves to work on the hardest and most divisive issues. I kind of feel like that's exactly what we need right now. So Lene's here to share the results of their new poll.
Let's start here. Raise your hand if you have run for and won elected office. Yeah, great. Raise your hand if you felt like having a D next to your name and the Democratic brand helped you win that office. All right, that's more than I thought, honestly, so we've got some place to start. If you look around, though, you can see that there's a problem, and it's not one that happened in the last couple of weeks. It's been growing for a long time, and I think it's one that we really need to address squarely if we are going to be able to wrest our government back from the MAGA forces that have now taken it over. So when I agreed to do this talk and share this poll with you, I hoped and honestly I believed that we were going to be in a different place. I was very hopeful until I wasn't. And so before we dig into the data, I just want to take a moment to talk about the vice president. She was dealt a hand, and in my view, she played it almost perfectly. In the last 100 days, the decisions that she made, she outgrew everyone's expectations. And so in our discussion about where we go from here, there's going to be a lot of circular firing squads. There's going to be a lot of people with takes about Vice President Harris. My take is she did everything she could. But the problem was she was running with a series of anvils tied to her back. She was running with Biden baggage, with the weight of a Democratic brand that in many places is not serving us, with race and gender and all kinds of other things, and with some positions that she took in 2019 that came back to haunt her. She decided to take them under pressure from the far left in a Democratic primary, and then she had to speak for them later. So it is incumbent on us now to take a deep look at what happened and map our path forward from here. So in order to do that, we're gonna talk about our post-election poll. It's not out yet. We're releasing it to the public tomorrow, but we wanted to share it with you all first because we think you are a big piece of this solution. So we did a post-election poll. Again, was hoping this would be in different circumstances, but here we are now with some data to figure out where we go from here. We worked with a firm global strategy group. We talked to voters in all of the swing presidential states, 1,600 voters from November 7th through 11th, and we oversampled Latino voters because we were very aware, as we all were, that that was going to be a big piece of the conversation. So let's begin with the issues. When you asked voters who they trusted on a whole variety of issues, across the board, they said they trusted Donald Trump to handle issues more than Kamala Harris. This is shocking if you look at this list. There are only two things, if you look at the margin, that are in the blue: climate change and abortion. That's it. On all of these issues that people kept saying were their top priority in this election, whether it's the economy, where Trump was ahead by about 10 points, or border security, where he had a walloping 21-point lead, we just couldn't measure up. And even on something like protecting democracy, it was a wash. That's not the recipe for a winning coalition. You can look, I could stop right now. I could just leave, right? You look at this slide. How, with this backdrop, could you possibly win an election? Now, I've said before, and I'll say again, voters agree with Democrats on lots and lots of things that they don't care very much about. And I think that we really have to grapple with that. We have to understand that not only is this chart harrowing, it is almost exactly mirroring the issue priority order that voters said was important to them. The things at the top on which Trump had the biggest edge are the things that people cared most about. Now, you might be thinking, people care about abortion, and they do. And that is absolutely clear. But voters are smart. And they didn't believe that this election would necessarily directly impact access to abortion. We saw in 2022 where abortion access was proximate to candidate choice, where you said, am I gonna get Gretchen Whitmer and abortion access, or a crazy person and not? People made that choice. But they just didn't buy that Trump was gonna do a national abortion ban. And frankly, on our side, they didn't buy that we could deliver restoring Roe. And that's something that we're gonna have to grapple with moving forward. We saw some hints of this in the midterms that should have been a sign when you look at the outcomes in blue states, places like New York, Oregon, California. We didn't have the midterms that we did in some of those swing states because people didn't believe that Lee Zeldin in New York was gonna outlaw abortion, because he wasn't. So we're gonna have to really grapple with how we talk about this crucial issue that is life and death in a way that is real about what we can deliver and what we can't. So voters obviously are frustrated with the status quo. The electorate's in a pissy mood, and they are trusting Trump on all of their major priorities, particularly immigration and crime and the economy. And we know that if most of the country thinks we're going in the wrong direction, the person who's gonna win is the change agent. And the vice president really tried to land that. She tried to be the change agent, but what we found was it didn't work. We asked people, is Kamala offering more of the same or change? 60% of voters in battleground states said more of the same. With persuadable voters, that number was 73%. Only a quarter of swing voters thought that Harris was offering change. And if you add this all up, we asked people, why did you choose who you chose for the top of the ticket? 80% of people who voted for Trump said they did it because of his policies. Makes sense. That's what they said they trusted him on. We're gonna have to grapple with that. The decision on Harris was much more mixed. About 40% said, I think it's the policies. Another chunk said it's her character. Another chunk said, I just hate Trump. Another chunk said, I don't want Republicans in charge. It's just a much more complex picture. But Trump voters wanted what he says he's gonna do on the issues. So the next piece we looked at was ideology. And this won't surprise you all, you see it every single day, but we live in a center-right country. The plurality of voters say that they're moderates, but then when you look at who's left, there's twice as many conservatives as liberals. And this is true even in blue states, blue districts. There just isn't as big of a base on the left that there is on the right. It's the fundamental asymmetry that we have to grapple with. And that means Republicans can win largely by delivering their base and adding a little bit of swing to it. And that doesn't work for us. We have to win a supermajority of moderate voters if we're going to be able to get over the hump. And you'll see that in some of these key groups, they're even more moderate. Latinos, more moderate than the general population. Persuadable voters, 67% called themselves moderates. I think 5% called themselves liberals. There weren't a bunch of left-wing people sitting at home waiting for us to go after them. They all showed up. And on that note about who showed up, you'll see white college-educated voters do trend a little bit more liberal than the general population, and we know we did better with them. That's awesome. Welcome. Cool. But I was at a great welcome pack convening with our friends last week, and someone mentioned that in this election, 96% of white college-educated voters turned out. Folks, we have squeezed all the juice we can out of that. There is not a lot more to gain, and we absolutely have to add to that and appeal to a broader group if we're going to win. So looking a little bit more deeply at ideology, because who knows what those terms mean, we often ask this question and asked it again in our post-election poll. If there's a scale, 0 means completely left, 10 means completely conservative, where do you put yourself and where do you put the candidates? And here we saw folks put Trump and Harris pretty much equidistant from the center. So 5 is dead set center. They put Harris at 2.5. They put Trump at 7.8. That's about the same distance from the midpoint. But they put themselves at a 5.6. And what that means is they are a full point closer to Trump than they are to Harris. A point might not seem like that much, but if you look at the distance on there, it's like a Richter scale. When we see, we've asked this over decades now, when we see those dots moving closer together, that's who's gonna win. It happens every single time. And so we need to figure out how to move our dot closer to where voters think they are. Now, I'm sure many of you, me, other people spent countless dollars and minutes trying to persuade people that Republicans were extreme, because they are. Did the voters believe us? The answer is no. When we asked which party was more extreme, look at that number. It's within the margin of error, but they actually said Democrats are more extreme than Republicans. It's pretty much a statistical tie, but it's a statistical tie with this Republican Party. That can't be how we move forward. And if you add together the folks who said Democrats are more extreme and the 12% that said they're equally extreme, that's 56% of the electorate that says our party is extreme. If you look at the lower charts on there, it's even more depressing. You'll see about 3/4 of persuadable voters said that the Democratic Party was too extreme. Now, before I move to the next slide, I'm gonna give you a little bit of a trigger warning. This is the place in the poll that I literally had to put it down and walk away. So close your eyes if you can't take it. We asked in open ends, what's a word that describes these two folks at the top of the ticket? Sure, people said Harris was qualified, smart, intelligent, but the biggest word in the middle there is liberal. Remember that only 21% of these folks called themselves that, and that's the #1 word that they used for her. On the other side, you see strong leader. Now, this is the point at which I have to say there is some race and gender stuff in here that I do not fully understand how to get beyond. So we can acknowledge that. But also, our party brand was an anvil. We have to make sure that our future nominees are not contending with out-of-step policies that they took a position 4 years ago to satisfy the far left, and that they are not contending with a view that they are extreme and liberal. These word clouds get even more depressing but clearer if you look at key groups, low propensity voters, ticket splitters, persuadables, late deciders. You can see on the bottom, they didn't like Trump, but they did not think that we were a viable alternative. And finally, I've listened to a lot of podcasts over the past 2 weeks, but one that I decided not to listen to was Bernie Sanders on the Daily, because I knew what he was going to say. He said, and has been saying everywhere, that the problem was we were appealing to the middle, the problem was Liz Cheney, the problem was that we weren't far enough left. Now, I don't know how you could say that with the data we've seen so far, but we wanted to test it. And so during the summer, Third Way wrote a memo that we shared with a lot of allies. We called it the red light, green light memo. And on all of the toughest issues, we said, here's a way to handle it that appeals to a broad electorate: order at the border, safety in our communities, and holding violent criminals accountable, opportunity to earn a good life, hard work, these kinds of messages that actually Harris embraced for her 100 days. Those are the green light messages. And then we tested typical Democrat lefty stuff that we called the red light messages. And we're like, don't say that. Say this instead. Do not say open borders. Say order at the border. And what we saw was that in every single instance, those green light messages, those moderate mainstream messages, out-tested the left messages by 20 points. And you know who liked them? Democrats. Democrats liked them. Latinos liked them. Everybody liked them. So there was just significantly more support for these kind of policies and positions and messaging that Harris embraced in the last part of this general election. The problem was the anvils. The problem was she's still contending with the party brand. She's still contending with 2019 positions that voters really they weren't sure which one was the real her. So where do we go from here? We have to wrest our government back from the MAGA forces that now control it. The only vehicle for that, I believe, is the Democratic Party. Sometimes I wish there was another one, but there isn't. This is the car we've got. We got to make it work. So we have to shift our brand toward the center and be able to win in the midterms so we can put a check on Trump in the House and win in 2028. And that's going to require some hard conversations. We absolutely cannot have a repeat of the 2019 Democratic primary, where people are raising their hands for substantively bad and politically poisonous ideas. That means we're going to have some hard conversations with folks in our lives to make sure that's not the case. But if I look across this room, we know how to do this. You do this every day. So I truly believe that if we are going to save America, guys, we're the ones we've been waiting for. It's going to come from this room and this movement, and we've got to put our heads down and do that work. Thank you. We've got time for a couple of questions. Yeah. Go ahead. It's got a microphone behind
We
me.
need.
Yeah.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Megan Lukens, Colorado State Representative. You were giving examples of green light messages. You said order at the border, and I was just wondering if you could give a few more specific examples of green light messages.
Sure, and we're putting the poll out tomorrow. It is all in there, and I can also send you my red light, green light memo because it's one of the most fun things we wrote during this campaign, frankly. But on crime, what we found was really leading into safety and accountability was super important. So we talk about it as accountability and prevention. And the prevention piece people already know about Democrats, the accountability piece they question. Are we willing to hold people accountable if they hurt other people in our communities? Yes, we are. And also, we want to prevent crime moving forward. So that one has tested really well across all the research we've done. On issues around transgender young people, we have done 15 rounds of research on this, and it's something we care about a lot. There is a way to talk about it, and it's about parents and families. It is about parents and families and doctors being able to make the right decision for their children. That is what we're facing. And that's going to come up a lot more because we have now seen multiple people put forward for big positions that deny the existence of transgender people. We cannot be the party that goes back on that. But we have to grapple with the fact that Americans aren't with us on a lot of these issues, and we need to persuade them. And order at the border was my favorite throughout the cycle because I kept saying it and then I kept hearing other people say it, and I was like, yes, not border security, order, because people don't like chaos. They want order. And you know what? Migrants want order. Immigrants want order. Everyone wants order. We need the system to work. And so it's not about militarization. It's about creating a process that can actually work and do it in an effective way. On the economy, it's all about hard work and opportunity. My favorite international stat is that if you ask people across the developed world on a scale of 1 to 10, how important is hard work to getting ahead? In France, 40% of people say it's a 9 or a 10. In the United States, 90% of people say it's a 9 or a 10. We love hard work, we believe in it, and we think that we can make our own destiny. So those are a couple examples. Yeah.
Thank you. So I want to talk a little bit more specifically about economics, because in watching how the electorate flips back and forth frequently, and that we have probably a majority that are low information voters that are really just, it's easy to penetrate, milk is expensive, right? And I've been wondering a lot about thinking a lot about the fact that we do see in our global economy, income gains go to the top. Generally, there's just a whole bunch of people that feel left behind and pissed off, and that the government works to benefit people not like that.
Yep.
And then when they're low information and they check in for an election, they're like, I'm mad, this isn't what I want. But I've been wondering if no party could really get a real advantage unless you can grapple with the fact that our economy does not work for the majority of people in the country. Yeah. And I will say I listened to Bernie on the daily, and that was his main point. Yeah. And I don't think he's wrong, but I don't know, it's hard, it's not anything that's easy to fix. But I just don't know that there is a path to really getting people getting them on message with Democrats unless we really are, our economy just, the way it's structured is a bit of a problem there.
Yeah.
I want your thoughts.
Absolutely, and we did a lot of economic research earlier in the cycle, and one of the things that we found was that voters now give Republicans an advantage on being the party of working people. I don't believe that we can move forward and win across the board unless we change that. So absolutely true, and on that I do agree with Bernie Sanders, although not on much else. But I think one of the problems that we've seen across the board is that people believe that Democrats don't really care about the economy, that we don't really care if businesses succeed in this country. And we asked a question that I didn't even put in the public release, but about what was the driver of inflation. Was it price gouging by companies, or was it overspending by the government? And the latter one, hands down. So whether or not that's true, I don't believe that some version of left-wing populism where we just bash corporations is the way forward, because people already believe we don't really like business. So we're just reinforcing a thing they already worry about with us. I think that the vice president was absolutely right to talk about capitalism and to talk about how to make it work, and in particular, how to make it work for people without a college degree. We have about a third of the country with a college degree. They're doing okay. The rest are not. And we have to be the party that looks like we care about that and have answers for that other than you should all go to college. So we've started down that path. I think there's a lot more to do, and I'm sure at the state and local level, there's a lot that you all are doing that could speak to that. I've got one over here.
Hi, Mayor Tashara Jones from St. Louis, Missouri. I think that at some point we have to say the quiet part out loud, and I'm hopeful that you've done research on the how race and sexism really played a role in this election. We thought that our country was ready to elect Hillary Clinton, who also did just about everything right during her campaign. Same thing with Harris, even though I agree she was carrying a whole host of weights on her shoulders and having to do all of this in 100 days. But I think that we're doing ourselves a serious disservice if we don't grapple with the role that race and sexism had in not only this race, but in this party and in this country.
Yeah. Absolutely, and in the public release of the poll tomorrow, you'll see a piece of it that I didn't include here because I wanted to talk about action that we could take in the near term, and this is obviously a much longer term problem. What we saw, we did an academic set of questions that are used to aggregate to a racial resentment and sexism resentment scale. They're tested in academia, and it doesn't ask you directly, it just asks a bunch of related questions and then creates a metric. What we found was that racial resentment played about identical a role in this election as it did in 2020. There was a big association between racial resentment and voting for Donald Trump, but it was exactly the same this time as it was last time. It wasn't more because of Harris. That doesn't mean we don't have to grapple with it, but it's really about Democrats and about what Trump is selling, not just about this nominee. On the sexism piece, it was slightly different. With the overall electorate, it was correlated the same as 2020. With late deciders, the sexism piece was much more correlated with going towards Trump. So that's something we're gonna have to figure out too. And I know, I woke up the next day saying, are we ever gonna have a female president in my lifetime? And I've spent a lot of time thinking about that. And I think that that's always gonna be an anvil. But if we don't have 7 others, we could have gotten over the finish line here. And I really think, we were close enough that we could have outrun it if we were able to solve some of these other problems. I think I have time for one more question.
Christine Reeves, state representative from Washington. As many of you probably know, the only state that shifted farther left this election cycle. But my question is actually rooted in actually that challenge, that I'm a pro-business Democrat in a suburban swing district in South King County, and find that being a pro-business Democrat in the Democratic Party right now, particularly in Washington, is incredibly difficult. And I think as I've watched over this last election cycle, the key takeaway I feel like I heard, but maybe didn't see reflected, or it may be reflected in the full poll, is that for a lot of Democrats in particular, but I think the public in general, this election was about character and about morality. And I'm curious whether or not there's any data reflected in your poll on how voters perceive the Democratic Party as the party of morals and character and justice relative to the Republicans, who obviously ran an entire campaign on morals and character and justice. And I'm just curious if you can speak to that.
As I was preparing for this, I was taking a look at the question about why did you vote for the top of the ticket, and I noticed that there were 10% in Trump's camp that said they voted because of his character. And I was like, who is that? I don't understand. Those people we're not getting back, whoever that is. But I think it's a great question. I think, we didn't test morals and values particularly in this poll, but in the research that I've seen over the past couple of years, one of the things that we see is that people do agree with a lot of the values of the Democratic Party, but they might have some disagreements on some, and they worry they're not allowed to say that out loud. And so one of the things that some really great partners that we work with often at Wide Angle Research did was say, if you see a Democrat at a party, you're hanging out at a Christmas party, what does the Democrat look like? What do they say? And they were like, they're telling me I can't make that joke. I'm not allowed to say that. They're boring and they're not the person I'm trying to talk to. And then you're like, what is the Republican? They're like, oh, they're fun. So absolutely, especially in this time, we're gonna have to hold on to our morals, but we're gonna have to do it in a way that creates space for people to have differing opinions and figure out that balance. And I think hold fast to the values that we have, that transgender people exist, and transgender young people are going to be in the crosshairs, and we absolutely have to stand up and defend them, and also make space for people to have questions about the rules participating in sports and things like that. We can do both of those things, I think, but that's the challenge ahead of us. Thank you all so much, and I will turn it over to Jonathan.
Thank you, Lene, for that compelling and important presentation. I'm going to go ahead and call up our next panel. We've got a terrific group of folks who are going to dig into the issues highlighted by Third Way's polling. They'll give us a view of what happened from on the ground in battleground states, and most importantly, talk more about where Democrats go from here. So if we could ask Lauren Harper Pope to come up. She's going to lead our discussion. She's a political and communications strategist, co-founder of the Welcome Party, which has already been mentioned today as a fantastic partner of New Deal and an important organization dedicated to building a big tent Democratic Party that wins. She's joined by Matt Iglesias, a Bloomberg columnist and author of the must-read newsletter Slow Boring on Substack. And we will hear from two New Deal leaders, Scranton Mayor Paige Gebhardt-Cagnetti and Atlanta State Representative Tanya Miller, who is the newly elected chair of the Georgia House Democratic Caucus. So welcome, everybody. And Lauren, I'll let you take it away.
Good morning, y'all. Great to see this beautiful room of people. Thanks, Lene, for a great presentation. We love Lene and Third Way. All right, guys, let's get into it. I feel like this is the buzzy topic session, so let's have some fun today. My first question is more of a joke than a question, but as two swing state residents, how happy are you not to see ads anymore?
The key was the Hallmark Channel. There were no political ads on Hallmark. So if you find yourself in a swing state in another election year, Hallmark is the way to go.
Duly noted. Thank you. I'm going to start with my friend Matt. Slow Boring, great publication. Y'all should subscribe and paid subscribe. So after the election, you wrote, an honest assessment of why Democrats lost has to acknowledge that 90% of the explanation is an inflation-driven anti-incumbent trend that has hit essentially every rich country around the world. You want to talk any more about that and what that could mean for Democrats' response to problems over the next 2 to 4 years?
Yeah, I mean, sort of trying to make 2 points there. But one is, you saw incumbent parties losing all throughout the past 2-3 years. There was global inflation. It was a huge headwind for everybody, everywhere. And so on some level, I mean, I think that's good news, quote unquote, right? I mean, everybody was hit with these things, right-wing parties where they were incumbents, et cetera. But it does also mean that going forward, you just still have to think about what are we doing? What were the structures inside the Democratic Party that made it difficult for the Biden-Harris administration and the Harris campaign to address that question effectively, because you're not going to have the exact same set of issues and problems recurring in the future, but we need to ask, what are the internal dynamics that made it challenging? I think Lene's polling basically highlighted it, which is that you have a country where conservatives outnumber liberals by a very large amount. And so to win, you need to express to people the view that you significantly differ with liberals, right? Like in meaningful ways. But that means that you risk backlash from liberals. The last time that I was on this stage, I was interrupted by climate defiance protesters who seized the stage. They were outraged that I had written a column expressing the view that Vice President Harris's stance on fracking was correct. But what I said in the piece was that, it's not good enough, right? If you want to position yourself as somebody who understands the role of natural gas and fossil fuels in the American economy, you can't just say, okay, I agree with it, right? You have to articulate a perspective that you disagree with the most extreme members of the environmental movement, that you have a different opinion on these topics, but then the risk is that people will scream at you. When you're constantly optimizing to not get yelled at by left-wing people, you're not conveying to moderates that you disagree with left-wing people, and so you get all those results that Lene just put up here. There's a lot of nuance in specific questions, but like that chart, right? Conservatives outnumber liberals by 2 to 1. You need to make people think that you are not one of them, and that means being brave enough to get yelled at, I think just structures absolutely every topic.
I was there when climate defiance came to come at Matt, so can confirm that that's a true story. And literally, yeah. And just doubling up on the bravery piece, because I think that is going to be really imperative for the next few years. Going into a question for the group here, I guess just what were your biggest takeaways from this election? And try not to be down in the pits, because we're a silver lining group, right?
I'll go. I think, well, first of all, we're all still in a little bit of shock, and certainly for Black women, a little bit of mourning at what we witnessed. This thing that our mothers always told us: you have to be 3 times as good. All the things just to be considered and to stand and watch a woman who was probably the most qualified presidential candidate that I have seen in my lifetime. Take the loss that she did is personally something that we are grappling with. But I think at the end of the day, the message, the takeaway is that we have failed to own the ground, and we have failed to own the message. And that's essentially what we just heard in the polling. We have to become the party of working families. It's difficult to have a big tent party and to get coalescence around a wide variety of important issues for our constituency. But at the end of the day, we have to focus on the things that bind us, the things that hold us together. And, I love to hear smart people talk. That's why I love coming to New Deal conferences. But the people don't want to hear this shit. Like, they want to hear... they really don't. Like, they don't want to hear all this. They don't want to hear us wonk out anymore. They don't want to hear us talk down to them about policy and fracking. And, they want to understand, what are you going to do to make my life better? Do you see me? Am I centered in where you are? Are you talking to me, and are you listening to me? And there is no party better suited to do that than us. And I think we have just got to be better at saying it plain, and making it simple for folk, and reconstructing the brand of Democrat as the party of the American working class. And I think if we do that work, we'll be more successful. That's my takeaway.
Well, I want to push back just a second on that, because I think both of y'all are right in some ways. But the problem, I think, is that people don't want to hear, like Lene was mentioning, that this wasn't an election about racism and sexism necessarily. It was about centrist policy. Harris was a progressive 4 years ago. So for her to just all of a sudden be a centrist was not authentic or reliable for voters. So while they do want authenticity, they also want the policy that Matt was talking about. Like, that's where voters are. So I just want to make that statement.
Well, just to say what my point is. So I'm speaking from Georgia, so let me just center myself there. You know, the black vote was down in Georgia. There was a disconnection with the black voter when we had a black female president candidate on the ballot. And the reason for that, I think, is far more simple. And I think when we talk about who the voter is, you know, there are voters like you and me, and then there are voters that are not. But they are voters. And just for example, I'll give you, my mom has been a true blue Democratic, but she never misses an election. She will never miss an election until the day she is no more. Half of the stuff that Democrats are talking about, it's not even on her. It's the price of bread for her, literally. So what I'm saying to you is that we cannot continue to take the centering of working people for granted, and we have got to message and talk to them, not stop talking about these important issues, but know what the message is and who the messenger is for the diversity of our electorate.
So Saturday after the election, I was at the Ukrainian Vets Club in Scranton, Pennsylvania. And in that room are a lot of veterans, a lot of just neighborhood folks. And two individuals, these were separate conversations. Hey, Mayor, saw you yesterday on the news. What were you talking about? They didn't hear what I was talking about. It happened to be a no tax increase budget for 2025. Oh, that's so great. They didn't care what I was saying. They didn't listen, even then when it was good news. They just saw me, and Knockwood seemed to, after 5 years in office, have a generally positive opinion about me. And we think about Donald Trump and how he's been doing just that since the 80s. It is image. And so I love these conversations, Matt. When I hear your voice, I hear me in the car listening to the Weeds for years and years. So I'm just going to close my eyes every time you talk. So it's great to meet you. But we have to keep having these conversations. I have these types of conversations in Scranton. We're doing the policies, we're doing the stuff, but we don't talk much about that. We're really trying to get out what we're doing in images, right? We're putting up street signs. I'm cleaning up garbage. A couple weeks before the election, it wasn't a set cleanup, I was just moving some cardboard away from an underpass underneath a railway in my neighborhood, and a guy in a bright red truck full of Trump signs. The whole bed was full of Trump signs, and he pulls up and he says, Mayor, is that you? Are you okay? And I said, yeah. He's like, you're doing a great job. You're doing a great job. You keep it up. So everyone in this room, we all know that at the local level, we do know our constituents, they know us. There is cross appeal. I don't know if he votes for me, but some of them do, I know they do. But a lot of that is the image. When they see us picking up the garbage, they don't care what I'm doing on housing policy. They really don't care. I mean, they don't want it in their neighborhood, let's not kid ourselves. But we're not talking about these granular things. We're not talking, and it's devastating. We're not talking about climate change. We're talking about stormwater and how we're not flooding your basement. We're gonna do everything we can to make sure that we're not flooding your basement. Now, the policy of that doesn't make sense because the money for that comes with Democratic administrations. It comes with the investment from the Biden-Harris administration and the rescue plan and the infrastructure bill. And I have been talking about that, and clearly it wasn't enough. But I think we have to really sit back and understand the reality that so much of this is image, and so much of it is what we're putting up, and people aren't listening to the words we're saying unless it's something that they really disagree with and is going to trigger them.
So, you guys are good politicians, and part of good politics, right, is you talk to people, you communicate with them. I mean, just like you guys were saying, right? And you seem agreeable, and that's great. And I'm being a jerk, and I know that, and I'm self-aware about that. But what I'm trying to say here, right, because I think if people need to take something away in their hearts, not necessarily say to the world, but take something away in their hearts, right, from this election, it's like, yes, image matters, identity matters, racism, sexism, structure, American public opinion, et cetera, but a weakness for Donald Trump was that there was a concern that Republicans would ban abortion. Democrats knew that was his weakness, and they said that a lot about him. Trump knew that was a weakness. So what he did was he said, no, that isn't true. No, I won't do that. And journalists gave him a hard time about it. They said, well, what if a national abortion ban passes? Will you sign it? He said, no, I will not sign it. I will veto it. There are pro-life people, a lot of pro-life people in the Republican Party. They have very strong feelings about this issue. They believe this is the legalized murder of innocent babies. He told them no, in public, no, I will not do what you want, because he knew the voters wanted to hear that he agreed with moderate voters about this, not with his base. I think the Harris campaign made a lot of smart decisions under difficult circumstances, but I did not see them ever once make a decision as bold and decisive on a critical subject of electoral weakness, something where they were excruciatingly clear, drawing a really hard line. There are people in my coalition who have strong feelings on this topic, but I disagree with them. I agree with you, the median voter, right? Part of the genius of local office is that you get to focus on more practical stuff, and that's incredible. But like in big picture national politics, we're talking what is the brand of the Democratic Party? The brand is that it's a liberal party in a country that doesn't have that many liberal people. You need to be able to take some big, tough swings like Trump did on the abortion issue, like 8 years ago he did on the Medicare and Social Security issue, right? He said, here's a part of the conservative agenda that people don't agree with, and I am going to ditch it. I'm going to take the darts. I'm going to be contentious. I'm going to draw a hard line. Now, I think he's probably lying about this stuff. I think bad things are going to happen and there's going to be backlash, and that's going to be an opportunity for Democrats. But the point is, he tried to convince people that he wasn't lying, that he had really broken with his base. And for all the good things that the Biden-Harris administration did, that the Harris campaign did, I don't think they ever drew that kind of line.
But in defense of local, I don't see why those local stories and images can't be in the national political sphere,
Absolutely.
right? Like where I was desperate to have Kamala Harris in a construction vest going around all the bridge work or sitting in traffic as a joke, like, man, traffic is so bad because there's so many bridges being rebuilt. Like they're funding that, they're helping with that. Donald Trump was giving $100 bills out at the grocery store. It's probably illegal, but people liked it.
For sure.
Yeah, you heard it here, y'all. Say no to the groups and realize that you're in a room full of people who are going to have your back, right? All right, Mayor Page. You live in the great state of Pennsylvania. Do you want to tell us more about your thoughts on Pennsylvania's turnout and electorate decision-making, electing Trump, and even down ballot, maybe victories that you saw?
Yeah, we had mixed results. We were able to keep the Pennsylvania House. Malcolm Kenyatta, the state representative, is right in the back. Hello, my friend. Pennsylvania House Democrats maintained their one vote majority that they have had. So we still, and Joanna McClinton, I don't see her in the room today, but she is a New Deal leader. She is the Speaker of the House in Pennsylvania. And them keeping that body was from the hard work of Joanna, all of the representatives, and a ton of volunteers across Pennsylvania. And I know there's a lot of states where the state level politics, they were able to preserve a blue House, a blue Senate, but the state went for Trump. And it was really interesting to watch. We had one of those districts right next to Scranton where Jim won. He won his seat, but it went Trump by a lot. And a lot of that is because it's local and you can know your folks. And I think a lot of it is racism and sexism, to be honest, in some of these places. But our brand is off. In Philadelphia, 100,000 fewer voters in Philadelphia this year than in 2020, and that's tough to sift through that. We had an incredible ground game. I mean, something like 10 days out, 2 million doors knocked in one weekend. I mean, it was all the Obama alumni came back. They left their families for a couple months. They came back to Philly. We had everybody out there. They just weren't really buying what we were selling, and the fact that they didn't turn out was tough. There were also a lot of folks that came in, punched the ticket for Trump, and left. And I think that's why you see Senator Casey still fighting, Dave McCormick. That recount is going on. I'm not sure that it's going to go our way, unfortunately, but those disparate results are really interesting. But we held fast at the local level. We did really well there. We lost a couple of congressional members. That was tough, and that's where I didn't think that in northeastern Pennsylvania we would lose Matt Cartwright. He's our congressman. That was the biggest surprise for me in the evening. Jim Haddock, same district, kept his House seat, but Matt Cartwright lost. So the nationalization of things is really tough, and those ads that were just everywhere all the time on issues that, as we know, we weren't talking about. No, Kamala Harris wasn't talking about they, them versus you. She wasn't talking about that, but they were very successful in driving home those simple things that stuck in your head, and that was tough. And we got to combat that, and as we've been always saying for decades and decades, we've got to simplify our message. We've got to figure out how to get through to people in ways they remember.
Absolutely. Representative Miller, kind of same with Georgia. Obviously Georgia's a swing state, and there have been some trends there. Maybe you want to talk about the statewide results and what indicators in Georgia you think would be, indicators for other places across the country that we should maybe be paying more attention to.
Yeah, so for Georgia, it was interesting. We actually, I think nationwide, voter turnout was down. In Georgia, voter turnout was up. But the demographics of the up turnout, I think presented a challenge for us. The black vote was down. We were down 2 percentage points. The white vote was up 2 percentage points, and I think it made the world of a difference. I think what is going on, and some of this is definitely going to be regional, but I think the disconnect between the party and the people is most evident in Georgia for me, because the base did not turn out for the first black woman president on the ballot. And so, and what we were finding on doors was that people just didn't see a difference. They just didn't understand how their lives hadn't got better for the last 4 years, and they just didn't understand, well, what is she going to do for me? They just did not see themselves reflected really in either candidate, and so they just stayed home, right? So we had a lot of trending red in places that had trended a little blue in 2020. We had some areas that are trending a little bit more blue, but at the end of the day, there's just a lot of work to do. We are the minority party in Georgia. We started out with 78 seats. We netted 2 seats, so we are up to 80 in a 180-member House of Representatives. So, I think we were forecasted to be, based on demographics and the redraw and a court decision and all the fights we have all the time about voting in Georgia, somewhere between 83 and 85. So while we didn't net, there is a lot of disappointment in terms of how far we are away from the majority. So the important takeaway for me in Georgia is this. We have got to engage with our base a whole lot. And we have got to take winning these local seats more seriously. We have got to activate our electorate, not every 4 years, but every 2 years in a serious way, which requires us to focus on things like fundraising and messaging. And so I think that's sort of our takeaway. Our party is having somewhat of a reckoning right now. I don't know if you're reading about that, but certainly 2026 will be a battle for us, and we are working very hard to try to get the infrastructure in place so that we can keep our senior senator and make some gains in the House, for sure.
So another question for the group. What did we learn in y'all's experiences and even nationally, Matt, at some of the trends about young voters, independent voters, Black and Hispanic voters? What were your biggest takeaways? I don't know how many people here were at Welcome Fest, but Millen gave a presentation on young voters and just essentially that they're independent voters, right? And they're not nearly as liberal as people claim them to be. And I think that obviously perhaps had an effect on this election cycle. So just curious of y'all's thoughts on some of the more niche demographic results for this year.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that we see is that when I was young, young voters were way, way, way more liberal than middle-aged people. Now that I'm middle-aged, my cohort is still the most liberal cohort in America. But the idea that this was a relentless historical tide is not true. The people who are 15 years younger than me are more moderate than the people roughly my age. And that's, just the nature of life, right? Black and Hispanic voters, obviously very important to the Democratic Party, very important to the future of the country. And I think that's something, what you said about engaging with the base, Black turnout and Black switch in votes, choice, preference to Republicans, very, very important phenomena. And I think we need to take this very seriously. When I'm not working, I'm a parent. My son attends a school that's about 10 blocks from here. It's 50% Black, 25% Latino, 25% white. Whenever the parents at the school, we disagree about all kinds of stuff, school board shit, you know how it is. It's in Logan Circle. It's in the kind of gay neighborhood of Washington, D.C. So we have a lot of LGBT parents. We have a lot of issues about LGBT issues that come up. The people who are most conservative on those topics tend to be the Black parents, often, church-going religious traditionalists. And you see when you just talk about things, the people who tend to have more traditionalist ideas about gender roles, again, tend to be the African-American and Latino parents compared to the affluent white parents. What would be convenient for Democrats is if you can just kind of staple progressive stances on each issue together and get everyone to agree. So you say, well, we're going to be progressive on racial issues and all the Black people will vote for us. We'll be progressive on immigration issues and all the Latinos will vote for us. We'll be progressive on LGBT issues, all the gay people will vote for us. That's great if it works, but in reality, you get tensions. You can drive voters away. One thing people do when they're cross-pressured is they stay home. They say, neither party is really representing me. You talk to Democratic Party donors, they're very fired up about climate change. You talk to working class Democrats or ex-Democrats, they're very concerned about the cost of living, right? And so you have to listen to the base, but with your ears and your mind open and actually hear what they're saying, right? And take that into account, because you can fall into kind of wishful thinking that it's all kinds of people have progressive views on some issues. And if you cherry pick, you can say, well, we can just make everybody happy. But, you can't. Most people have conservative views on some issues. You can't be canceling people. You can't be deliberately narrowing the tent, right? You've got to be engaged and listening critically to what it is they're saying.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry. I'll be quick. No, I agree with that, and I think that when I talk about, or as we are talking about, not I, we are talking about how do we message to this broad, big tent constituency in a way that is unifying. I think the simplicity, we have to hone in on those issues that everybody gets, everybody feels, everybody understands. It's fine to have a brand of being inclusive, but I don't think that we can necessarily if we're too loud on one issue, then folks think we're not seeing their issue. So for me, it's always a difference between policy and message. And so our policies are the best. We have the best policies. We just do, in my opinion. We're going to really work to get it right for everybody. But that doesn't necessarily mean we have to message every single policy. So we have to just be really surgical in the message that we are sending out to folks in order to try to get as many folks as possible in our constituency to coalesce around it. I think it's possible.
When I think of young voters and registering voters in Pennsylvania, we have closed primaries. So it's not policy or anything. Just out the gate, we are disenfranchising anyone registering to vote who doesn't want to pick a party. So there's things like that. There's structural reforms I think we need to make in places like Pennsylvania, so that when I'm trying to register an 18-year-old and I have to tell them about this closed primary thing, I feel like I'm already defeated, right? Because they're like, well, I'm going to register as an independent, and they should, that's good. But then they're disenfranchised from half of the election. So we have some of those pieces where we got some work to do.
I'm going to quote Matt again. So he was saying, and this is good for this room, New Deal leaders. This is a time for new blood and new leadership and a new round of frank argumentation. Do we want a big tent that can compete across the country and contribute meaningfully to better governance everywhere? Do we want a party that delivers economic policies that generate prosperity and wins votes by reflecting voters' actual moral and cultural values, or a party that insists on trying to impose fringe values on an unwilling populace while flailing to buy votes with unsound fiscal policies? So you also have, like, between that, it's good, right? That's good. That's good. Yeah, we like maths, right? You have written on that, and you've also written on like a common sense manifesto. So like, I guess just combining all those things, what are some of your prescriptions for the Democratic Party moving forward? And even just for the leaders here in this room who are obviously wanting to be good governance in their cities and towns and places.
You know what Representative Ryan said earlier really resonated with me, because what I took his message to be is that on some level, he thinks and I think that, you know, all of you in the room, I think almost everyone working in practical Democratic Party politics sort of knows what you need to say to connect more with voters, but there's an incredible amount of fear. I think so many elected officials who I talk to want to like talk to me off the record and say like, Matt, you know, I like your newsletters, and oh, how come but they want somebody else to like come along and take the risk of taking some brickbats from the left, because that will kind of clear the way for them, right? They're going to be like the icebreaker, and then some little ship will go in the channel. But what the congressman said is correct. Like, there's nobody who can change the image of the Democratic Party other than the people in this room. Like, you are the Democratic Party, and you can duck and cover and emphasize local issues as best you can and evade the national brand, or you can, each of you as individuals and as a collective can speak out, and we can tolerate each other. We can be inclusive in a true sense of each other if people have heterodoxies. But you know, you get a room, 100 kind of normal Democrats, right? Progressive on some issues, moderate on some others. But then you try to say, well, I'm only going to let you articulate your moderate views if you can achieve absolute consensus among this 100 people. And you're never going to articulate those views. So the collective voice will sound dramatically more extreme than any of the individuals in the room. And that's what happens if people are afraid. If they're afraid of getting stabbed in the back by their colleagues and their fellow Democrats and progressive organizations. And you all need to be braver. You all need to be more supportive of each other. People in my line of work need to be supportive. But there's nobody else. Like, this is what we have. You know, you guys have to do it.
Amen. Last question, and I think we're going to go into the group, so prepare your questions, friends. Again, I'm a big fan of silver linings and, you know, the good vibes, right? So I guess what were the silver linings that y'all saw from this election cycle? What are the things that you're like, you know what, we can look forward and we can learn from our mistakes and things like that?
I mean, I think in this room, we are so fortunate because we're in it, right? I know we have lots of friends, volunteers that are like, what should I do? What should I do? We got to get up the next day and go cut a ribbon, go write some legislation, go keep doing the work. So we're all, you know, we all worked very hard to be in these positions. We're very fortunate in this moment that we have each other, we can keep going. So I've been working to spread that locally, that, you know, we've got the networks now with national local leaders, with mayors in Pennsylvania. We have the network to navigate these things, and we're going to do this together. So keeping our communities together is really important, and trying to lift folks up. And I do think there's an opportunity here because Trump is so extreme, because he is, you know, really just a caricature, a Disney villain. People voted for him and not us in a way that is enabling us to have very serious and very candid conversations, and I hope open us up to really remake the brand of the Democratic Party. So I see that as an opportunity.
You stole my line, that last part. You were doing good, then you got the last part. I think to echo what the mayor just said, I think there is an opportunity for us in this really dark time to get in the lab together, to really get in the lab, you know, before you get in the booth, as the rappers say. But, you know, we need to figure out, rework, rebrand, recreate, re-energize our party in a way that this loss will force us to do. And so I think that viewing this, coming out of sort of the haze of disappointment, and viewing this as really an era of opportunity, an era of soul searching for us, is the silver lining for me.
You know, I think the best silver lining is that if you look at the battleground states, right, Harris did meaningfully better in those states. You can look at media market effects, et cetera. The literal campaign, right, the ads that were aired was quite good. And those ads, they focused on healthcare, they focused on tax fairness, they focused on abortion rights. Those are things that I think if you ask most Democrats, they would say are very core to them and their identity and to the party, which means that like there is a message there that people like and that is similar to the existing main message of the Democratic Party, but it is pulled down by a lot of cruft, which is bad and needs to be sloughed off. But like the basic winning themes in the ad campaign are like really solid, normal Democratic Party stuff that does not require some like wild reinvention. And we had down ballot candidates, people in this room, people like Ruben Gallego, lots of people winning based on those messages because they were not dragged down by some of the specific excesses of 2019, 2020. So I think that with like a little bit of common sense and a little bit of boldness, like there's really good material, like quite close to the core of where Democrats are.
Yeah, I want to close on something. My co-founder Liam and I wrote a piece for Democracy Journal this year and said, we must encourage candidates and elected officials to be party makers, someone who creates an independent brand by taking positions that work for their district in advance of pragmatic faction, not only their party, and not party takers, someone who embraces the agenda of ideological groups and then must explain those positions to their voters. So we're party makers in here, right? Because we like parties, right? I'm just kidding. All right, questions. Let's do it. No preguntas?
Everyone agrees with everything.
Dang,
That's
great. Y'all did great.
So we're all on the same page here, guys. All right, okay, fine.
Amazing.
Hi, I'm Nicole Clowney. I'm from Arkansas. And so this may be a little more cynical than I intended, but it's where I am at right now. We have 19 members, Democratic members of our 100-member House of Representatives, and that's our first gain in 20 years. So that's where we're at. So I've seen a lot of what Republicans have done to gain the power that they have. Republicans in Arkansas were really late to take control of the state relative to the rest of the country. They did that by being sort of all of the things that are the opposite of what we're talking about today, which I love and agree with everything that I've heard. The Arkansas Republicans do not allow one member to step out of line, right? They are not, the Arkansas Republicans have gotten more and more extreme so that what used to be normal positions are now seen as extreme left positions in our state. I think we really have to contend with the fact that for a while, they did in fact let the far right of that party dominate and make those decisions. And now I think we are at a place in our country, as we saw with the dots, where the window has just moved so far right. I guess just, do y'all have thoughts on that? And how do Democrats learn the not dark lessons from that? I will say I think Black women show us better than any other group in our state for sure how to kind of get together when it's time and all be on the same page. But just what lessons can we learn from that and what lessons shouldn't we learn from that, I guess?
Well, look, Arkansas is a very conservative state. I mean, I think it's and Arkansas had this Democratic legislative majority that was a lag of some very, very old dynamics. And so I think that in those contexts, right, we saw in the poll, 40% of Americans self-identify as conservative. Arkansas is more conservative than the average state. So they've got a majority of self-identified conservatives being very dogmatic, being very doctrinaire, polarizing everything. That works for Arkansas Republicans, and it works for Democrats in California. But I think it's not exactly like a lesson you want to learn so much as a limiting case. You know what I mean? Like that's not how Trump won nationally. Trump won nationally by acting heterodox, by reassuring people about abortion, by saying Tulsi Gabbard and RFK Jr. are Democrats and he's got a big tent. And so but he did, so it's a different problem set, I think.
Oh, yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
Good morning, everybody. I'm State Representative Dontavius Jarrows out the great state of Ohio. I have to be honest with you all. I have one of my colleagues over there, see Zach Klein over there. I went to barbershops all across the state as the assistant minority leader to campaign and to engage folks across a wide range of cultural perspectives. I've talked to my family members about this election, and after the election, we had really honest conversations with them. And some of my folks, some who were close to me actually, I since cut them off, have said that they voted for Trump. And I was like, but I sent you all the information. I gave you everything you needed to know to vote right. And they were like, well, did you go on TikTok? Did you know that Kamala wasn't black? And did you trace the lineage? Did you talk to this person, like Candace and Owens? And I'm like, what are you talking about? And it speaks to an infrastructure issue on the Democratic Party side, where I believe this misinformation campaign has really penetrated low, I don't want to say low literacy, but just folks who just are getting that information on a day-to-day basis. So I would love to get your perspective on kind of the misinformation, the advancements of misinformation, how it's really infiltrating the attitudes and perceptions of voters, and how do we combat that when we have maybe more of an archaic system of messaging that may not be doing the same thing to penetrate to those same voters?
Yeah, I mean, there's a steep hill to climb on that, and obviously the other side tends to lie a lot, and that's just not who we are. But back to the simplicity, we're on TikTok, we can go on Twitch, we can go on Minecraft, we can do all these things, but we have to do it with a simple message, and we have to do it with images that are going to work. We can't, try to talk about our housing policy for 60 seconds. No, right? So I think that simplicity piece is really important.
Same. I think that, we obviously can't start meeting misinformation with misinformation. That's not who we are. But I do think that the answer to it, the antidote to it, is to have a message that is simple and that resonates. And it's really just that simple. I really think that a lot of our issue is just with how we message. I think it's just as pragmatic as that, in my opinion.
I also think even some of the reversals we had in urban areas this year was interesting, of New York City and other big cities voting more for Trump because they're seeing Democratic governance as not good. That's a big problem that we need to address. And Matt and I were at the Abundance Conference when he got harassed, which was talking about better government efficiency and cutting red tape and making sure that government actually performs and works well for people. So I think that there are some solutions that are bubbling up. So we can work on some stuff soon.
Hi, Andrea McClellan, Norfolk City Council. Our turnout was really low, I'm embarrassed to say. We had 56% turnout. We are a Democratic city. People weren't excited. I guess my question or takeaway would be, and also, by the way, yes, Virginia, we have an election next year for governor, or lieutenant governor, attorney general. We didn't see resources from the Harris campaign on the ground in Virginia because everything went to our friends in the swing states. And that disenfranchises a lot of folks, number one. So how do we continue to have that pragmatic message consistently, and not just when it's time for an election, not just when folks decide to show up and go to a black church at the last minute, right? We've got to be doing this year round in every year in every state. And how do we do that?
Yeah, my mom lives with us, and we're extraordinarily lucky. We're from Oregon, so she still votes in Oregon. She would not register in Pennsylvania, and I told her if we lost by one vote that it was all on her. But she was so mad that there was so much money in Pennsylvania and none in Oregon. So I understand that. I think that's where this, again, we've lost to the Disney villain, and so the county party conversations, the state party conversations are finally opened up, right? One of the chairs and leaders of the Harris campaign in Philadelphia came out swinging at the Philadelphia chair, and it's broken open a conversation that needed to happen. So I'm hopeful that this opens up county party conversations, state party conversations, so that we're doing that, that their offices are open across our states all year round, because I agree, we're going to lose ground, because Virginia will be a swing state again, right?
You know, my silver lining was that the sort of super PAC and campaign ads that Harris did were really, really good. Those ads, of course, they're focused in the swing states. You know, ground game, you're right, there should be investment. 50 states. But, you know, TV ads, of course, you run them in the swing states. But some of the weakness you see is that Democrats were not carrying forward in their earned media, whether that's TikTok or whether it's Meet the Press, the same kind of message that they put in the ads. And you see that to people in Norfolk who are not being bombarded with future forward ads. The campaign isn't about healthcare, tax fairness, abortion rights, right? And, you know, some of that is the limitations of the campaign, the 100-day campaign. Some of it is the limitations of the candidate, her seeming discomfort in sort of unscripted settings. Some of it is structural weakness of Democrats on social media. But you got to look at the messages that work and then say, how can we deliver those messages all the time? Everywhere, and not just in our most scripted, most targeted kinds of settings, because you never know. I mean, the weakness in the election results in Virginia this year was surprising. That was closer than they thought it was going to be, because they weren't, you know, it wasn't decisive, so that's a fine targeting decision, but you want to be talking to people throughout the country with your good messages, not like saving it for your ads.
Yeah. I'm Bruce Rubin. I'm an advisor for New Deal and ran a bunch of companies before I got into politics, so it's a good thing. And write some checks for all of you, so that's also a good thing. So we spent $1.5 billion or more on this election. Where I live is ground zero of the election. All 4 candidates showed up in my county 2 weeks before the election, which is in Delaware County, Pennsylvania. My borough is actually the most liberal borough this side of Berkeley. And yet I had 6 people knock on my door election day, which was a waste of time, frankly. And $1.5 billion got blown away really ineffectively. I don't agree with you, by the way, on the ads. I thought they were terrible. And from a business standpoint, when I look at the party, it needs a major overhaul, not an incremental approach. And what I hear is incremental approaches where you need basically structural approaches, both at the local, state, and federal level. And it also needs a new face across the board, because the party's viewed as old. Its leadership is old at the top. The party's viewed as old. Its infrastructure in Philadelphia, because I know the congressman involved in Philadelphia, is old. And how do you feel about that? Because I'm here because I care. I'm here because I think it needs to change. But I do believe incremental change is not enough.
No, I agree with that. I mean, I think that, look, I was watching a Simon Sinek video just sort of talking about this idea of branding and thinking about sort of some of the problems, structural problems I think we have as a party. I think that, you know, it would be great if we could figure out a way to brand the party starting from the why, right? This is the sort of Apple model of how Apple is so successful, even though its products are possibly not as great as the other competition. It is really, it's finding a way to create a brand, and this could be a whole seminar, a whole panel, a whole conference in and of itself, the rebrand of the Democratic Party. But, you know, we have to find that thing that unites the folks under this big tent, and they have to feel it in their heart. It's not something that they have to think about. They have to already feel it and then be predisposed or inclined to follow us where we go, right? And so that requires us to figure out who we are. What do we stand for as Democrats? What is this party about? Is this the party of each one of our constituencies? Is it the party of the loudest constituency, or is it something more basic, something more true, something that doesn't require people to do a whole lot of thinking? We got to tap into that lizard instinct in people and make people think that their survival, their growth, their prosperity it lies within the Democratic Party, and that is going to take work. I don't think that's something that any of us could snap our finger and have the answer to. Otherwise, we'd have the answer to it, right? But I think recognizing that that's a problem where we are right now is a really important first step. So in messaging, you want to be messaging consistent with your brand. I do think we have to be really clear about who we are as Democrats and then message that.
Well, and we have to be real about what things are. So I was on the platform committee for the DNC. I thought that would entail being a part of conversations. There was no conversation. There was a PDF and a Zoom the next day and an up-down vote. And it was very disappointing to me. And this is the first time I've said this out loud. But I just, what is that? You have assembled, there are like 6 mayors on it. There were legislators. There were all these people that have been involved successfully in local and county and state politics for years. And there was nothing except for just a quick Zoom, thank you very much. And it has to be real. The conversations have to be real at the state level, at the local level, especially at the national level. So I agree. We gotta be honest. It's not pointing fingers at anybody. It's not anybody's fault, one person. It's just we gotta be real about this, because if we're not real, we're not authentic, people aren't gonna find us authentic.
So, the point about the party being perceived as old is, I mean, obviously the president is quite old. That's not a misperception that people have. You need candidates who can speak in their own voice, right? I mean, to some extent, right, more money, you can air more ads. That's great. But you can get into a kind of a million man month fallacy about developing the actual message, right? Like adding more and more people into the room to decide what you're going to say about the issues doesn't reach a conclusion. You need a candidate who decides for herself and then can discuss the issues in town halls and interviews and be the brand. And, there's a lot of reasons why that wasn't the case, but we're now sort of 3 cycles in a row of trotting out establishment figures rather than somebody like Barack Obama or Bill Clinton, who were seen as disruptors, who then became leaders. And, I think the more successful candidates are like that. They kind of came in from somewhere, they were fresh, they just seemed more new and interesting than kind of throwbacks to the politics of the 90s.
Good morning. My name is Marcelia Nicholson. I chair the Milwaukee County Board of Supervisors. In Wisconsin, we have 72 counties. Around 5 of those are consistently blue, and those are our more diverse counties. As a county leader, I've had the pleasure of traveling around the state. And more than once, I've been told, you're the first Black woman I've ever met. You don't seem so bad. And I know we've heard that folks have questioned Kamala's Blackness, but they also questioned Obama's Blackness, and he overperformed in Wisconsin. I wonder what you think about that, and what do we do to prepare our base? Because this includes other people of color. At the end of the day, Trump is a known quantity, and Kamala Harris was not as a Black woman. So how can we prepare our base for both a woman president and a first Black woman president?
I think part of the problem was that Barack Obama was a conservative Democrat, and Harris was perceived as not a centrist Democrat.
I mean, Obama spent a lot of time in rural Iowa and rural Wisconsin challenging people's preconceptions about what a Black politician would be like. And Harris didn't really do that. I mean, I think everybody in politics, right, faces certain kinds of stereotypes that people are going to have about them, and that can be a problem. And then the question is like, what do you do to try to address the problem? If all you know about someone is this a black woman, you're going to think she's probably a lot more liberal than the average American, which is true, as a population average. But then you can try to engage with people and address that, or you can decide not to. And if you're trying to make a career not in rural Wisconsin, but in San Francisco, then being seen as very left-wing is probably good for you. And she had a very successful career. It's hard to become vice president of the United States, but that whole career never involved winning over swing voters until suddenly she was the candidate for president of the United States. That's not great preparation, right? Whether it's Tammy Baldwin or Raphael Warnock or Ruben Gallego, you have all kinds of people who win in tough races, but that wasn't her background.
I think there's sort of, if you just look at this question and you're looking at Barack Obama and you're looking at Kamala Harris, I think there are two conversations, right? I think there is the question of how Barack was able to, I'll just generically say, appeal to white voters and insert moderates to conservatives to, conservative, independent leaning, and then Kamala's ability to do that for the reasons my colleague just described. But then I also think you need to look at how Barack was able to connect with black voters. Which is for a different reason. And that has, I think, a little bit to do with just talent and personality and emotional IQ or EQ. So some of this is perhaps a little bit the stuff of political scientists, right? And some of this is just about talent and ability in the arena of the campaign. And I think it's not for nothing that she had such a short runway, right? She had so much of a long career behind her. She had the weight of the primary behind her and how she had to bend to the left, and not really enough time to course correct and sort of sell her ability to speak to really either of those sort of issues.
Thanks. Erin Mendenhall, I'm Salt Lake City Mayor. This has been a really great discussion. Tanya, I want to go to that conference. You should just make it happen, where we sit down and redefine ourselves.
Me and you, let's do this.
I think part of the difficulty, I was the 8th one in my race in 2019 for mayor. I was the last one in, and I ran because I was sick of hearing the other 7 candidates mostly talk about the problems, sometimes talk about their theory of how to solve them. And I thought, people need actual tactics, and I'm going to wonk out on you, public, and I'm going to tell you how we're going to get it done. And I think part of the difficulty in looking at those numbers on the poll this morning is actually, maybe winning today really just looks like a lot of complaining to identify emotionally with the struggle that the majority of voting Americans are feeling, and they don't want to hear me wonk out. They don't want to hear the Democratic Party maybe wonk out on how we're going to solve it for everybody. So my question for you is, I love what you're saying. I think, Tanya, your silver lining is real. This is an opportunity for us to redefine. How do we do that when what we see coming down the pipeline of threats against our communities is so real that we have to stand up and speak to the injustices that are about to happen? How do we not play into continuing to pit ourselves as far left liberals who don't understand what most voters are wanting to see?
Yeah, I think we have to be careful about getting breathless over every single thing, right? Energy management and choosing our battles, because we don't know what's going to happen. We don't know what they're going to focus on first. They can't do everything and tear down every institution all at once. I think in our communities, we need to be pointed and smart about what battles we pick, while we, most importantly, keep doing the work, right? This room is full of steady hands, full of workhorses making government work every day for people. That's going to be a lot of it, is just doing our jobs and doing it well.
while simultaneously fighting back with the Trump pieces. But I think we can look back, and we'll all have to kind of look back into how we were during the Trump administration, because I think there's a lot of pushback of like, oh, the Democrats are just going to complain about everything this guy is filing. There might be a couple things that they do that are okay, and we should think about acknowledging a couple things that go well to give ourselves credibility, because if we're just anti all the time, we're not going to be perceived as thinking or allowing that discourse or allowing for them to take a win if they have it. Now, well, they'll never, do a win for us, and Trump's going to put his name on all the bridges that got done with the Biden money. But we've got to make sure that we're not the screaming liberals about every single thing that Trump administration does, in my view.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and we were actually, some colleagues and I were talking about this yesterday, about how the issue of the trans issue, right? How Democrats were sort of doing what we do and standing up against an attack, right? And then sort of that became, that was perceived as being the only thing we cared about, right? And so Republicans are very good at forcing us to stand up on issues that are not necessarily the issue of the day for the vast majority of folks. And so this is the management of sort of big coalition politics. And I think, part of the way we do that is how we frame the fight, right? So instead of all the things, insert the things that make us sound, uber liberal and out of touch with everyone, including my own mom, who will never vote for someone to be discriminated against ever, right? But she also doesn't get this. Right? So how do we message back to our home base? So Republicans are creating solutions for problems that do not exist. They are wasting time talking about an issue that is not an issue, that belongs to parents and doctors and families, when right now in Georgia, Black women are dying at the highest rate in the country when they're trying to have babies. That we have 300,000 kids in Georgia who aren't on health care. So interrupt it and then punch back. So it's like, kind of like a bob and move, and it's I think we do that when we're clear about what we want to say, right? And when we're not clear about what we want to say, then we get, it's like squirrel, So I think it's meeting these, knowing that that's their playbook, that they have used it consistently, and being prepared with a message box that gets us back on track, right? And then we continue to hammer home our message about who we are and why we're the party that works for them, and point out why they're not. That's all I got right now. I'm sure we can come up with more together.
I think, you got to welcome people into the tent, right? I mean, this is welcome party, but when they start doing stuff, people are going to be alienated by some of the stuff they do, right? If they lay off half the federal workforce, national parks are going to be degraded. Some people who love nature are going to say, wait, what's happening here? And if they show up, you can't then tell them, okay, here's a 70-point plan, right? Like, you need to now agree that we need to end the oil and gas industry, or we don't want you in here. You got to say, like, you can defend our position on trans issues, but you can't force everybody to agree with it and say, you're going to be canceled, you're going to be thrown out if you have a traditional religious opinion, right? In so much of that, if you think about like the Women's March 8 years ago, so many people were appalled by Trump and wanted to show up and express that basic idea. This man is appalling. And what a lot of them received as they joined the resistance was a lecture, a laundry list, more and more things that you had to sign on for to be considered an acceptable member of the resistance. And over time, he kept getting more and more popular, right? Because the mechanisms of resistance were alienating. They were telling people, they were deliberately narrowing the tent, deliberately kicking people out. You need to lower the bar to participate and to say, if you think some of this stuff is bad, if you think this guy seems a little nutty, like, join us. That's what we're working toward. We're working for you, not telling you what you need to think to be on our team.
One last question, right?
Hi, I'm Stephanie Gerber-Wilson. I host the podcast Freedom Over Fascism, and I'm a historian. And I talk to a lot of people about message, And I think that in a lot of cases, we have the right messages, but we are not heard. The media environment has changed so considerably that having the right message is a small part of it. So how do you guys see what needs to happen in order to create a media environment where we're actually heard? Because all the things that you said, actually, I think we had the right message in a lot of places, but it was completely overtaken by the right-wing echo chamber. So what do you think that we need to do in order to actually reach people with those messages?
I think one thing, and being here in DC where there are some funders and philanthropy is trying to figure out how they can move forward. We lost our local paper essentially last August. It got sold to Alden Capital, went from 160 years, family run in Scranton. I mean, a daily cartoon, like the whole I would not be in office if it weren't for the coverage of the corruption in Scranton and how I was fighting it. Now it is just a national paper and they wouldn't endorse anyone. So we need more local journalism and we need to be really pushing philanthropy to help with that. It's extremely important. And the timing of it, when they sold the paper August 28th of 2023, I thought, oh, this is so exactly perfect to see what's going to happen in November of 2024. It was awful. So that piece I think is really important. We need our local papers back in places like Scranton.
And I think that, some of this is that a lot of the folks that didn't show up to vote also don't listen to podcasts, right? And so the way I view messaging is, yes, you have to have the right message, but you also have to make sure that you're delivering it by land, by air, by sea, and that every single person in some respect as a part of this electorate has it. Everybody knows what Apple is. Everybody knows what Apple is, right? Kids, my nephew's 9 years old. He knows the difference between an iPhone and an Android, right? And he wants an iPhone. He doesn't know why, but he knows he wants an iPhone, right? So it's almost like, how do you make your brand and your message so ubiquitous that it is everywhere all the time? I don't know that it happens like that, right? This is the work of figuring it out, but it's certainly, what is the message? Who is the messenger, and how is it getting delivered? And I think all of those things can be wrapped up in we have to own the message, right? But I think your point is very well taken.
You guys know the Serenity Prayer, though, right? You need to,
yeah.
Right.
God grant me the serenity.
Yeah, so the strength to, accept the things I can't change, to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Yeah. I always want to push back on this media stuff, because the media is very important. If you happen to be a billionaire, yes, please, address the local news environment. But if you're an elected official, you need to address what you need to address, right? The media didn't make Kamala Harris say that she wants to spend taxpayer money on gender transition surgeries for criminals. She said that, right? The media didn't make Joe Biden try to shut down all oil and gas leasing on federally owned lands. They didn't make him, in an environment where people were upset about inflation and too much government spending, they didn't force him to do student loan forgiveness that the public wasn't asking for. These are the things that are under the control of politicians and elected officials. What do you say? What do you do? And back to Lene's charts, right? It is a country where conservatives outnumber liberals. If you want to win in a swing state, you need to convince people that you are meaningfully distinct from the left. And that means you have to do what you can do. It would be amazing if you had an all-consuming propaganda environment that lets you make everyone happy all the time, but you don't, and you gotta play on the field that's out there.
All right, friends. Closing thoughts. Anything you want to leave our group with?
It's on us, but I love that, and I love being in the fight with all of you. It's great to all be together in this moment.
Yeah, I think we're the good guys. I still believe that, certainly. And, we have to practice what we preach and really keep our party like the America we envision, one that is diverse, one that has capacity, broad capacity and tolerance, and one that keeps its heart close to what's best for the people.
Absolutely. Like, you guys can do it. Like, I really believe that. Like, you know what people are like and what they want to hear, and like, just like, do it.
Just do it. There we go. Thank you, guys.
Thanks to everybody for a fantastic discussion, to Matt, Mayor Cognetti, and Representative Miller. We're going to call a slight audible here. I know we have Congresswoman Kuster, who is on her way. The votes are running a little bit long on the House floor, so we are going to go ahead and get started with our next panel. Of course, we can't complete a discussion about the election portion of what we're talking about here without talking about democracy. So that's going to be the subject of our next discussion. This conversation will be led by Matt Cohen, senior staff writer at Democracy Docket, which is a leading news platform dedicated to information, analysis, and opinion about voting rights and elections in the courts. He's joined by the Secretary of State from Arizona, Adrian Fontes, Ben Davis, who founded and leads Civic Resolve, a program of the WEN Collective. And we'll have Barbara Smith Warner, who's the executive director of the National Vote at Home Institute. That's a national nonprofit that works to promote and expand the use of mailed out ballots that allow all voters to safely and securely vote at home. So if we could just get everybody back in their seats or go out in the hall if you need to take a quick break, and we're going to move ahead with our next panel, and we will take a break and have Congresswoman Kuster when she gets here. So thank you all.
Thank you so much. So I'd like to start this just by acknowledging that, while the results of the election definitely weren't what most people in this room were hoping for, we actually had a fairly smooth election with little problems. I think, everyone on the stage would mostly agree with that. And the state of our elections, they go pretty well, pretty smoothly. We've got this down to a science, and we do it pretty well. But in 2020, there was a lot that went on. And this is how I know that this election went smoothly. My colleagues and I were really preparing for a repeat of 2020. We track every piece of election litigation. We were gearing up for more conspiracy theories about hacked voting machines, false allegations of mass fraud, contested election results, and a tidal wave of lawsuits, multiple attempts to illegally subvert the election. And none of that really happened. So I think that's a testament to how well our elections are run. Now, they're not without their problems, as we'll get into in a little bit, but I think that is worth a silver lining about this election that's worth acknowledging. Now, about those problems that I mentioned, there are major issues. We know that. Access to the ballot, civic engagement. Throughout this election cycle, my colleagues and I tracked the GOP's massive effort to disenfranchise voters. There were Republican lawmakers in states across the country that were passing legislation to block people from voting. The GOP doubled down on their election litigation strategy. They spent more money than they've ever have before on lawsuits to block people from voting. Just before the election, I put out a piece that noted that this is the most litigated election on record so far. And that was before the election. Obviously, the results, there were not lawsuits trying to overturn the results, which is good, but there is still, the fact remains that there is this massive right-wing effort to disenfranchise voters. And so, I think that is something that everyone in this room is very much aware of and actively fighting against. And then on top of all of that, election officials, have to grapple with the onslaught of misinformation and disinformation that really sow discord and distrust in our elections. We really saw that in 2020, and it's still a huge problem. things keep evolving. These threats keep evolving, but despite all that, our systems are working fairly well, and I think this election was a testament to that. And we really do need to keep working to make sure that they work smoothly and that we can protect democracy in these institutions. Of course, this is just kind of my bird's eye view as a voting rights reporter from this. So, I really would like to start this panel and this conversation by asking someone who literally just administered an election and may have a different perspective about what is and isn't working. So Secretary Fontes, I'd love to kick this off, asking you, from your perspective, how did this election go? How did it compare to 2020 previous elections?
Well, thanks for having me in first, and thanks to New Deal and all the folks who help pull folks like this together. I've personally found it to be really useful, learning a lot about a lot. And the one thing I know is the more I learn, the more questions that I have. And to answer your question, I think we're doing much better than we were in 2020, but 20 was better than 18, and 18 was better than 16, and so on, because this is a very dynamic and a very evolving space. And I think one of the things that we have to really sort of level set is the scrutiny that election administration has underfallen over the last several years is all based on some significant, focused, and pointed efforts by our foreign adversaries. It doesn't have anything to do with one guy's grievance or all that stuff. And the folks that are out there driving Americans away from one another regarding our politics, they're driven mostly by our foreign adversaries. We have to realize this, and we have to understand this, first and foremost, for two reasons. Number one, when you put yourself in the position of an election administrator, you are outside of the political space, and you have to be objective in analyzing what you're looking at. I don't have the luxury of being a heavy partisan. I can't. The work that we do, however, in the election administration space is done in a lot of ways by partisan elected officials like me. And so we've got to walk that tightrope. How have we done? Better every time. We're more safe, we're more secure, we're more accountable, we're more transparent, far more litigation, I'll give you. We have just gone under the 36 active lawsuit threshold, and we're pushing down towards the 24 active lawsuit threshold. Thank you very much. We're moving there. This is all like very good for the lawyers in Arizona. But when it comes down to it, what you have is a space in government that is the epitome of the way we look at government in the United States of America. We want, I'm going to date myself with this, we want a Yugo, or we want a Cadillac, but we're paying for a Yugo. Right? We want something that is absolutely perfect every single time. We demand perfection, not only in performance, but timing and everything else in between, and we're not paying for it. The election administration is the only space in federal critical infrastructure as designated by the Department of Homeland Security that has no sustained federal funding. Most states don't fund their elections enough, and many states like Arizona leave the bulk of it to the counties. And the counties then have to struggle and find that money. And I'll give you one quick example before we move forward, because it really does come down to resources, human and otherwise, and we've lost a lot of people to threats and stuff. We can get into all of that. We're doing well, but we could do better. And the example that I want to give you is this. Our presidential primary, presidential preference election in Arizona happens in March. By statute, they've set a number of dollars per ballot that the counties get reimbursed. There's a lot of county government folks here. You'll relate to this. It doesn't cover half of the cost of the election. And this is an exclusively partisan affair that doesn't allow independents to vote in it. You have to actually designate what party you're going to be in Arizona for the president. So the party infrastructure, both parties, have cost the taxpayers a whole bunch of money. Most of the independent voters cannot vote. The parties decide if their candidates are going to stand for the election, and then the state doesn't cover half of the cost. And we have to do it perfectly every single time. Now, I'm not in county government anymore, I'm at the state. But in spite of these sorts of things and in spite of that type of an example, I think we're doing really, really well across the entire nation. And if this election is evidence of that, then you can take it to the bank that we've been doing well, because guess what, folks? We haven't changed a lot in the last 10 or 15 years.
You touched on a couple important points that I want to get back to, but I want to hear from our other panelists. Barbara, what do you think this election, from your perspective, how did it go, especially as it relates to kind of mail-in ballots and mail-in voting?
Well, thanks, and thanks again for having me here, New Deal. I'm a former state legislator from Oregon, and so particular shout out to Tobias Reed and Janelle Bynum, both of whom I served with in the legislature, and I'm thrilled to be able to kind of call out their successes and the role I think that New Deal has played in helping to support them in their efforts, and in Oregon. But I work for the National Vote at Home Institute, and what we focus on is voting at home, which most of you probably think of as vote by mail. But what it is, Oregon was the first state to go to a universal vote at home system. 24 years ago, every voter gets automatically mailed a ballot for every election. So in 2020, you may have heard a little bit more about this, right? Faced with the pandemic, all of a sudden, how are we going to do this thing that is such a collective social thing in most states on how people vote? Well, we did a lot of pivoting to voting at home, and it is not a coincidence that more people voted at home in 2020 than any other method. Not a majority, but a plurality, 47%. And the rest of it was split between early in-person voting and election day voting. So what happens? Wow, highest turnout ever. This is going to be transformative. I'm sure this is going to be what we're all going to focus on. Getting more people to vote is what we need to do. Well, instead, 4 years later, we are looking at an election in which turnout is lower, and use of mail balloting is lower as well. Now, we all knew that 2020 was kind of a big bump, but the use continued to increase. But I was really struck by a couple of the folks who were on the earlier panel. Georgia had 27% of their voters voted home in 2020, and only 5% this year. Same thing in almost all of the swing states, the percentage of voting at home. And the thing, and I will wait to talk a little bit more about this, but I guess the thing that I would like all of you to think about is, people have mentioned the idea of the need to do foundational changes, right? Well, if voting is the foundation of a democracy, shouldn't we want it to be as easy as possible? And is there anything easier than sending every voter their ballot? It flips the script, right? It makes it so that voting is an opt-out instead of an opt-in. Right now, you as a voter, you have to go find your ballot wherever it is. When we are talking about universal vote at home, which 8 states and DC do, that's some foundational change that really centers the voter in the process and leads to really significantly increased turnout, increased engagement, down ballot, youth voting, traditionally disenfranchised. So I think that we're still working on numbers, but I would say overall, it went very well, and yet I'm really struck. I think it's an important difference that the going away from that voting at home also led to less voting overall.
I want to talk a little bit more about that, especially, there's a shift this year in 2020. The GOP and Donald Trump really attacked mail-in voting, and they changed their tuning, and they really encouraged their base to embrace early mail-in voting. They weren't worried about getting egg on their face about changing their tune about it, but I'm curious, how did that affect kind of your efforts, and Ben, chime in too, in the access to the ballot, from your perspective, can you talk a little bit about how that affected you?
Yeah. I'll just talk a little bit and let Ben comment on that as well. So again, if you look back at 2020, amazing turnout, high turnout, great use of this, and then you are hit with the 1-2 punch of there is the allegations, the big lie about voter fraud, after 2020, and voting at home, mail ballots become a target of that. So that enters the kind of the ecosystem and the conversational thing. So that just kind of was pushed out for so long and so extensively that it created doubt among not only their target of the folks who are responsive to that Republican messaging, but also to voters in general. Add to that, people, everybody, all of us who just wanted to get the pandemic behind us, right? We didn't, a lot of what we've done in the last couple of years we take every state where it's at, because you can vote at home in every state in the country, right? It's just a matter of how easy or hard it is. So we do a combination of trying to promote policies that make it easier and just remind people that it's a great turnout mechanism, period. And so the combination of that kind of, that ongoing baseline of, oh, it's fraudulent, oh, it doesn't work, with, oh, that's so 2020, that's so pandemic, that's not a thing anymore. It really had, and I cannot actually tell you the number of times when someone would email me in the last year and a half the notice of, oh, look, Trump supports it now. And then, a week later he would say, no, it's a terrible thing, it's fraudulent. So did it have an impact? Yes. What I hope it has is more of an impact going forward. Because the truth is, as we have over the last 20 or 30 years increased access to it, back in the 90s, in the early 2000s, it was mostly Republican legislatures that eased up, that made it easier to vote at home, that took away the excuses that were required, right? So it's really only a recent development that it was opposed by Republicans. So I hope that we get back to the foundational truth of it, which is it just increases turnout. It doesn't actually help one side or another. It just makes it easier to vote, and it makes more people vote. So I hope that ends up being a longer term impact.
And Ben, I'd love to hear from you about how mail-in ballots this election affected civic turnout, but more so your sort of point of view of what worked, what didn't work in this election in terms of getting people to the ballot.
I live in Colorado, so our election day is 3 weeks long. It's a great way to go for the folks that have an address where it works. I think we put a lot of pressure on election day to represent everything we are civically and politically, and I think that is a reduction of values and experience that is, I think, very confusing for us in these moments, and I hear a lot of that in the discussions about what just happened. If we're going to reduce civic engagement to the act of voting, then I think we're going to find ourselves in a really hard position as we try to figure out how to build the kind of communities we want, support people the way that we know we can through these public institutions. And I think that we've got to really slow down, maybe know a little less and question a little more, and ask ourselves, what does it mean to be civically engaged? What are the different expressions of that? Because voting is certainly one, and I think reducing barriers to vote, which is something we believe in and fund, is important. I think we just ran the best election in recent history. I think that is very apparent. We knew the results so quickly, and it was accurate and effective. And that's a testament to what we can accomplish if we decide, like we did as a collective philanthropic community in 2020, with all the advocates and partners and experts and county clerks, to say, this system is really brittle. We've got to invest deeply in its leadership and in the capacity with which they have to run our elections. And we need to be in a different place in 4 years. And we are. From where we were in 2020 to where we are today is very different. It's more resilient. It's more updated. We're not using Windows 94 anymore, or at least not in as many places. Still a little work to do there, I think. But we also have to expand our perspective beyond Election Day and start to ask ourselves, what are the different expressions of civic engagement? It's service, it's belonging to commissions and clubs, it's working in soup kitchens, it's all the things that allow us to connect as humans. And right now we aren't doing that terribly well. Half the country is admitting that they're incredibly lonely. They have no close friends that they would call close friends. We've got, only I think it's a quarter of the average community member participates in their community in any way. We're eating a steady diet of envy on social media platforms. And then we're asking ourselves to go express how we're doing one day every 2 years. That's a little reductive, but I think that is the challenge that I see us facing more and more. And so the question for us is, how do we invest more deeply in the localism that civic engagement actually is and help people find pathways to that? How do we invest in digital town halls that actually allow us to communicate well with each other instead of what we're doing now? I don't think Nextdoor in its current form is the model. How do we have more relevant candidates at the local level so that people have a more personal connection to what's happening? Our entire civic conversation, if you do want to focus on voting, is largely federal. And then we have 70% of these elected seats in the country aren't being contested. And then the folks from these communities that don't feel served by this system and just voted in very large numbers on election day for, I think, something that a lot of the folks in this room would not have asked for. Those folks don't see a relevant candidate locally. They don't feel like they participate in their community locally. And then we ask them to voice how they're doing in a largely national election. I think that's a really tough way to handle the challenges we're facing as people and as a nation.
I think that's a really good point. It's something that I think a lot about in terms of the work that I do covering a lot of these barriers to the ballot. And a big one is that, because a lot of states have such wonky, weird laws, a lot of people don't really know when they can vote or what they need to do. I mean, a perfect example is in Pennsylvania right now, there's almost 20 lawsuits trying to challenge certain mail-in ballots because signatures were in the wrong place. And I think, there's a really opportunity to sort of parlay civic engagement to more voter and election knowledge and things like that. And I'm curious to know, do you see a connection there?
I mean, I see a connection with the lack of authenticity in how we talk about public life in this country. And I think most voters recognize it too. Somebody described most of the political conversation we just had this last year as largely as pablum. It's just words. It's like common sense solutions. How many times have we had candidates tell us they have common sense solutions? How many candidates in this room feel like they have to say that? Instead of saying what they actually want to say, which is address the actual issues that they know their community is facing and address it in an authentic and meaningful way. And then we go ask people to vote because they feel like they're actually being respected enough to be a part of the conversation. That has to change. We spent $10 billion in political advertising this cycle telling ourselves that we're not the same and we're separate. And then we're going to go have another civic discussion about how to be together in community. That's a really tough proposition to make. And so I think all of this stuff is so intersectional. It's not just voting. It's not just the quality of our candidates. It's not just the parties. It's not any one of these things. They're all informing each other. And I think the more we give ourselves a moment to ask ourselves how they're informing each other and how we can all be contributing in different ways to the future that I think we all want, I think we're going to get to a better place than we are right now, reducing this to who's the next chair of the Democratic Party. That's not the problem.
If I could kind of squeeze in, I think there's a different perspective here that folks on the political left tend to leave out a little bit. Motivated citizens will figure out how to vote. If you're not motivated and we're just kind of expecting people to do it, then voter suppression is I think, more prevalent and higher up on the priority list. But what we're doing is we're assuming, I think generally speaking, that they're motivated to vote. We're not giving them a reason. We're not attacking with passion. We're not being aggressively normal. We're just expecting that citizens, given the tools, will do it. It's a little bit of a lazy approach, I think, because if you're not motivated, if you haven't been exposed to a reason why to be passionate, then voter suppression is going to win, right? But it was a whole lot of people who were really damn passionate many years ago because they were exposed on why they should be passionate. Because leaders explained to them and showed them from the pulpits, from the lecterns, from the standing on park benches, here's why this matters to you. And we sort of take this very eggheady approach on the political left. Well, we have this, and this affects these people, and this affects those people. It's not about you and your passion and your family. And that to me is, it's really normal for folks to care. But if we kind of just do normal, then yes, voter suppression can win. But there was a lot of voter suppression going on in the 60s and in the 50s. And voters won. Motivated voters won because they had leaders that were pushing and were making sure that there was some passion in what we were doing, right? And so I'm not saying voter suppression should be ignored or deprioritized, but I do think that there's a broader angle that we should be approaching this with vis-a-vis whether or not voter suppression, what kind of impact it actually has. Because look, it's about as easy as pie to vote in Arizona. Right? You can get your ballot mailed to you, you can vote early, you can turn it in all the way up to election day in the envelope. Yes, it takes us forever to count our ballots. Fine, get over it. But motivated voters, voters who feel passionate about their vote, I think that's one of the things we're really missing, because a lot of people, like, why in the world is it that we can't figure out how to tell people or just explain to them why they should give a shit? That's where we're losing folks.
Robert Putnam in like the late 80s wrote that book, Bowling Alone. If you all seen the movie on Netflix, it's well worth your time. He was saying then we're going to be doing what we are doing. We're not connecting. Like we're not joining groups, we're not with each other in settings that aren't political, hanging out with each other so that we can then do this better when the time comes to make a vote. I went to my local polling office in Jefferson County, Colorado, and this was at the height of the partisanship and the election, just to see how they were doing. I was curious about the process. And there's a room in there that I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with there's like 100 people. They were all Democrats, Republicans, and independents, and they had the colored lanyard. And they weren't allowed to talk politics, but they'd been sitting there opening ballots for the county for the last 6 cycles. You know, the oldest person in the room was 94. They're clearly all from different political persuasions, and they were spending their time just really being with each other. They know about each other's grandchildren and their health issues and all the things. And it was just such a vibrant, beautiful conversation happening in the heart of our democratic process. And it was healthy and normal and viable. Like, that is possible, right? If we can kind of structure these spaces to do that. And then I think the vote, it becomes meaningful because there's passion around being in support of your community. Right now, I don't think any of us feel good about the political conversation we're having, and yet we're just allowing it to happen. And I think that, like, there's got to be a way to shift this. And I think it's take some time and some willingness not to engage the way we do.
I want to dig back more into that, but we're going to pause this panel really quickly for the Congresswoman to come do some talks. Thanks. Should we just...
Okay, thank you, everybody. Enjoying a great conversation. So we will have time for questions for the panel, so hold your questions. But for the moment, we really appreciate the Congresswoman making time amid the crazy voting schedule that's happening today. So to introduce her, I want to welcome Rebecca Perkins Cuoca, a New Hampshire state senator and the newly elected leader of the New Hampshire Senate Democrats.
Well, good morning, everyone, and sorry to be right in the middle of your panel. It's such an honor to be here with you today, introducing a dear friend. As we have heard this morning, this is a moment of shift, a moment of some slight living in the unknown while we search for a more honest truth, a more grounded approach, a moment where Democrats are in slight suspension, a moment where it feels grounding to be together with all of you. And when I think of grounding us, of living as a Democrat that knows and is true to their values and yet is so human, I think of Representative Annie Kuster. In this moment where we seek our footing and return to truly connecting to our constituents, all of them, not just the ones who voted for us this time, I look to Annie Kuster's lead. Annie has always been a person first, full of laughter, humanity, a good story, and warmth. And she has always been tough, as these and other times have required. She has led the New Democrat Coalition with strength and common sense and has done so much for our state in the 12 years she has served us. She does all of this with such grace and occupies a special political space where we know she'll fight and get things done for us and come home with a good story and a laugh. In an age of highly divided voters and politicians, this humanity and ability to find common ground in being people first is a leadership that I will not soon forget and will spend many days trying to follow. Everyone, our dear friend that will soon be greatly missed, Representative Annie Kuster.
So awkward and rude. Hello, everyone. Thank you, Rebecca, Senator Coca, as we know her at home. Delighted to be with all of you this morning here at the New Deal Conference, Leadership Conference. You inspire me in my work, and I want to share with you a little bit about what we are up to in this moment with the New Dem Coalition in Congress. Your public service is a great example, and we need local and state and community leaders to step up and join us at this moment of hard work ahead. From your work to grow your state's affordable housing stock and your focus on supporting hardworking families and small businesses, the people of New Hampshire are better off. We're Senator Coca, and the people of your districts are better off with all of you. So good morning to all of you. I'm Annie Kuster from New Hampshire's 2nd District, and I chair the New Democrat Coalition in the House and the New Democrat Action Fund. I've represented New Hampshire's 2nd Congressional District for the past 12 years. We're gathered together, as Rebecca has said, at a critical point following the 2024 elections. And I admire Debbie scheduling this event at this time. I imagine that you had hoped that we would all be together in a very different light. Certainly, I felt that way. But as we reflect as a party on Democrats' performance in November, one thing has become very clear. The majority of voters didn't believe that the top of the ticket was suited to tackle the issues they cared most about, from the economy to safety and security, and that included both the southern border and the issues around immigration, but also gun violence in our schools. As I went out on the trail in Pennsylvania, in Michigan, on Long Island, to work with our candidates in the swingiest districts, in the swingiest states, at the swingiest moment, we were hearing a much more mixed message from voters than our siloed parties have adapted to. We also heard a lot, frankly, about bodily autonomy, freedom. Freedom was a big theme, opportunity, and of course, protecting our democracy. Americans have sent Democrats a message rejecting the status quo, and we need to listen and we need to adapt. As we embark on a mission to reshape our party over the next few years, a good place to start is actually examining what went right for Democrats in this election, with many of you in this room, and certainly with the New Democrat Coalition in Congress. We can start from learning from our successes in the House and down ballot. I'm pleased to be here to report to you that the New Democrat Coalition will be over 100 members strong. In fact, we'll hit 108. And with Derek Tran, hopefully on the verge of winning in California, 109. And with Adam Gray and a few more votes, 110. Common sense, pragmatic leaders with deep, deep experience and deep, deep connection to their districts. In the 2024 election, our members and candidates overperformed the top of the ticket in crucial races across the country. I'll give you an example of an extraordinary leader, Kristen McDonald-Rivet in Michigan. She was running in one of the swingiest districts in the swingiest state. Critical to our success, she overperformed the ticket by 6 points. She overperformed our colleague, Senator Lissa Slotkin, who was elected to the US Senate, thank goodness, and she overperformed Harris Walz by 6%. And that happened throughout. Virtually every frontline, our members that had the most challenging districts overperformed the top of the ticket in their district, and every New Dem endorsed candidate. Our candidates flipped at least 6, and counting Derek and Adam, it will be 8 seats from red to blue. We also won, I believe, 10 Trump majority seats. We are the only ideological caucus to flip seats. We welcomed yesterday and today inducting 23, hopefully 24, maybe 25 new Dems to the 119th Congress. And as I've mentioned, we protected 20 out of 22 frontline members. So truthfully, that is an extraordinary record in a very challenging time. And keeping in mind that incoming President Trump will not reach the 50% threshold, I think we can all take a pause on the great mandate narrative that has developed. Through these efforts, New Dems helped elect, as I've mentioned, at least 23, hopefully 24, 25, one of the largest and most diverse new member classes in the coalition's history. And as I've mentioned, we've grown the coalition overall membership from the 119th Congress in January to at least 108, perhaps 109, hopefully 110 members. So that when we hit the 215 mark for Democratic members, New Dems will be a majority of the Democratic caucus. That's an applause line. Now, how do we do it? As voters shifted to the right across the country, and by the way, there's more studying to be done. It wasn't all voters shifting to the white. It was a whole group of new people coming out to vote who are not voters, typical voters. That's why it wasn't caught with the polling. The polls asked, do you intend to vote? If they say, I don't know if I intend to vote, they stop talking, click, and we don't find out what they're thinking. So that's the big story, and we saw it in New Hampshire. We had same-day registration, and I had friends that were monitoring at the polls, and they were saying to me there were lines for the same-day registration. Usually that would be students, young people, people moving to town. This was people who had lived in these small rural towns for a long, long time, but not voted. And they were coming to vote, and they were on a mission. They had their IDs. They didn't know how to go about it, but they were on a mission to vote that day. And we have, perhaps we'll study the number, but thousands, maybe tens of thousands, and this repeated itself across the country. That's a whole nother story that we have to figure out. But what we did in New Dems, we won because we ran on common sense messages. We were laser focused on lowering costs, on, I've mentioned border security, but also personal security, the anxiety of families sending their children to school and the fear that they have that they won't come back, public safety, and access to reproductive health. And we steered clear of divisive culture war issues. And that's the discipline we're going to need going forward. That was the question that came up in our press conference this morning. How do we move forward on important policy while resisting the need to chase down every rabbit hole? We saw New Deal leaders across the country employ the same messaging strategies and win in key states as a result. And I should mention, for Debbie, we talked about this the other night, 12 New Deal leaders will now be serving in the United States Congress. So that's big news. Now, up and down the ticket, Democrats need to use this message in the coming years, proving once again that we are the party of hardworking people, the party of lower costs, and the party of economic growth. Jobs, wages, and most importantly, opportunity. This was a freedom and opportunity election, from the top of the ticket all the way down to the state and local level. The New Dem strategy worked in red, blue, purple, urban, suburban, coastal, mountain, rural, districts from north to south, east to west, and especially in the middle of the country. And we have the membership to prove it. I mentioned New Dems will make up more than half of the caucus, including 12 New Deal leaders. Moving forward, New Dems and New Deal leaders will lead by example and will build on our brand from the ground up, ensuring that Democrats adopt this messaging at every level. While House Democrats will be in the minority, the very, very, very slim minority, as I said this morning in the press conference, if Donald Trump keeps poaching the House Republican caucus, I think we will welcome Speaker Hakeem Jeffries in January. In fact, Democrats have to work even harder than ever before to not only push back on this extreme agenda and extreme messaging from the new administration and the Republican caucus, but at the same time, reach across the aisle whenever possible to make progress for our constituents. I like to call New Dems the can-do caucus. And there are issues. In my own committee, Energy and Commerce, we have 45 bills, bipartisan, that have already passed our committee that Speaker Johnson refused to bring to the floor over the last 6 months because he didn't want Democrats to have any wins for the election. But these are bipartisan bills. If you look at the child tax credit, it's a bipartisan issue, and there are many, many more. With Republicans holding this razor-thin majority, New Dems are positioned to play a significant role in the legislative process. And if we look back at my tenure over the last 2 years, issues like the debt ceiling and the default, it was New Dems that saved the economy, frankly, the global economy, from the chaos that would have ensued. It was New Dems 3 times that provided the votes to keep the government open. So this Republican caucus could not function on a 5-vote majority. They definitely can't function on a 2 or 3-vote majority. So following leadership elections last night, our Can-Do caucus elected our chair-elect Congressman Brad Schneider of Illinois, and he and I have already started meeting this morning to lay the groundwork for a successful 2 years coming up. Brad possesses the experience, the vision, the coalition building skills necessary to be a strong voice for the center. And Chair Schneider will be joined by Vice Chairs Nikki Baczynski from Illinois, Salud Carbajal and Josh Harder from California, and Mark Veazey from Texas. And together they will work tirelessly on the most important issues expected to come up over the next 2 years. And I mentioned Kristen McDonald-Rivers. She will be the new member representative to the leadership of New Dems as well, which is great. From advancing annual legislation like appropriations and the NDAA to passing tax legislation, and I mentioned the child tax credit will be an important part of that, addressing infrastructure and energy, enhancing public safety, House Republicans over and over will have to come to the table to get the votes to pass anything in the 119th Congress. So with our strengths in numbers and decisive leadership, New Dems are ready to meet anyone at the negotiating table to get the job done for our constituency. As I prepare to leave Congress, I'm looking to a new generation of New Dems and New Deal leaders to help Democrats regain the trust and confidence of our voters, to win tough elections up and down the ballot, and to enact our shared vision for the future. And I hope to be working with Debbie and all of you to make that happen. Thank you so much. Wonderful to be with you. And now back to our previously scheduled panel. Great to see you. Thank you.
Thank
you, Congresswoman. I'm going to jump back into it because we were having a really good conversation about civic engagement. And, one thing that I've been thinking about from your comments, Ben, is civic engagement. One of the biggest issues we have, the Dem Party has, there's a whole host of voters who are, like you said, Secretary Fontes, not as fired up to vote as they once were. At the same time, there's this sort of onslaught of misinformation and disinformation and various threats that are, trying to get people to not vote. How is that affecting civic engagement along with, the various messaging problems from the party?
Well, let me agree with Ben first. Civic engagement goes far beyond just voting, right? It's Bible study on a Wednesday evening. It's all of these places where we gather with folks. And so I think first and foremost, we need to recognize that a good civic society requires, Boy Scout and Girl Scout troops, right? It requires PTOs and PTAs across the country that are healthy and all this other sorts of stuff. And before I go on, I want to just compliment the Congresswoman. She's left already. I think she proved my point when she said there was a whole bunch of people who had never voted before in line with their IDs, had no idea what to do. Their votes weren't suppressed. Their votes weren't suppressed. They were motivated to vote beyond the voter suppression tactics, and that, I think, is really important. But again, civic engagement really has to be so much more than just voting and so much more than just politics. And those of us inside of the political bubble have to get rid of that nonsense. We've got to go out into the rest of the world and do the things that so many of us do, particularly on the local level, right? Folks, mayors out there and council members and boards of supervisors and commissioners, you guys get it. And as you move up, I guess, the political food chain, we tend to get closer and closer and closer into this little bubble. I see myself even from going from being a county official to a state official, I'm kind of in a tight bubble. I'm surrounded, instead of by just 5 members of a board of supervisors that I have to deal with and a couple other county officials, and then the rest of my life, I've got 90 members of a legislature that I've got to think about, right? And a whole bunch of other big statewide stuff that gets filtered through sort of this layer of lobbyists and special interest folks that I'm paying attention to. So I have to be particularly cognizant, and maybe that's where we get to, where we in the political class, because let's be honest, we are in the political class, we need to be honest with ourselves and reach beyond those barriers and get out into the real world. And I think that's what's missing. We don't know what civic engagement is because we're not engaged in the rest of civil society. We're engaged in politics, and we got to get out.
I wanted to mention what that really makes me think about. I agree with civic engagement. Somebody talked on an earlier panel, it came up that we can't just engage with people every 4 years, we need to engage with them every 2 years. I would argue we need to engage with them every day. I have been involved in a number of things. I started out as a legislative and political organizer for labor unions, and I've been involved in a couple different organizations that did just that what their focus was day to day, week to week, month to month engagement with citizens in a community, in a district. And the idea of having it be the idea of the way you create community, it's not just going and talking to people from September to November and thinking you're going to help make them vote. Mm-hmm. It is creating, go and do a Habitat for Humanity building site. And then the next month you do a bowling tournament. And then the next month you collect gifts for, kids for holidays or whatever it is. The idea of investing in our communities with organizers. I mean, that's of course how I think about it because I'm an organizer, but I've been involved in a couple projects like this. I've pitched this project many times in many different situations. The idea that, I was the caucus leader in Oregon. 20 years before that, I was actually the campaign director for that caucus, and I came out and said, here's what we should do. We need to start right now and hire organizers in all of our swing districts and have them do this kind of community engagement. And I still think, I've seen it be done a couple times, sometimes well. I've seen it be done sometimes not as well. I've seen it not get done many times. But the idea of that level, and we, not one person or one organization can fix all of our lack of civic engagement. But that is a big thing. And I do have to throw in one more thing, that what your point, Adrian, is so good about. We are not normal people, as I call them. We are whether you call us the political class or whatever else, we pay attention, we're engaged. One of the things that I hear the most about people about voting at home is they say, oh, but I love walking to the polling place in November and that beautiful day and the community feeling I get from going there. And I'm like, you're not the problem. The problem is the people who have 2 jobs or have a sick kid or who can't find where their polling place is or there's a weather event. The idea of centering the voter is you give everybody that ballot and they have the option to do that. Great. If you, Mr. I like to walk in the fall guy, you can take your ballot and walk in the fall and take it to your election office and see people in your neighborhood. But we do need to acknowledge that for normal people who have multiple jobs, who have whatever it is, that idea of focusing them, making it easier for them, reducing or eliminating the barriers for them, that is another thing besides motivation that is going to help them to do it.
Yeah, and I think this is a wonderful moment to have that conversation. I mean, okay, we're being given the gift of some space to rethink some things. And I think for, my peers in philanthropy that are focused on civics, the conversation is really, what are we orienting to, and can we orient to something that's 10 years out and start to really invest in that level of change? Because the political system is going to continue to work in its 2- and 4-year cycles, and that's the way it happens. Can we find a way to participate that isn't rooted in that short transaction, but actually offer more value and experience for more people to participate civically so that we're actually a partner to this process instead of a participant? And that, I think, is the moment we're in right now. We can do this. We can advocate to philanthropy to do it, and we can talk to each other about it, and we can just be explicit that if we want our votes to stop being transactional, we need to stop being transactional with voters.
There is a formula for that, established by a couple of philanthropists that I think everybody in this room knows. And it started in 2011, and it has had a significant impact on the Latino community. In 2011, the Koch brothers launched the Libre Initiative. And the Libre Initiative is coming into maturity now, 13 years after it started. That's the long-term, not just during elections, constant support of the community outside of the political cycle stuff. Exactly what you've described, there's a footprint out there. And it's had a devastating impact on our side of the aisle's politics.
I think you made a really good point, Ben, that I wanted to just expand on, is that I think this is a really great moment to have the political class get involved in that civic level, because we have this luxury to know that the Trump administration isn't going to be there for these communities. Some of them may not know that, but we know that. And so this is the moment to really kind of meet at that level, to get involved in kind of mutual aid efforts. I'm thinking Asheville, one of my best friends lives in Asheville, just got drinking water for the first time since September. And I was talking to him recently, and he was telling me, I was asking what it was like down there. He's like, the thing that's really interesting to me is that the people that are handing out supplies and food and all that are volunteers in my community. And the police and National Guard or whatever, they're basically protecting grocery stores from being looted. And I think there are kind of moments like that where, there's an opportunity for the class to really step in and show it's not an election year. This is how you civically engage and kind of meet people where they are.
But can I make a quick distinction though? Yeah. And this is gonna be, I know you're looking at me this is gonna be Fontes being Fontes here, okay? Communities of color don't want handouts, they want opportunities. Communities of color, and I can speak to Latinos in Arizona, to narrow it down. We don't want to be gifted something other than an open path upon which we can walk. towards our own destinies and our own futures. This is what we want. And while in times of emergency and in times of need, all people who are in need should help one another. But if we're not talking about opportunity in business and entrepreneurship, opportunity in education, moving forward in medicine, helping people, advance their and protect their families and provide for their families. Jason Kander said it as best as anybody ever said it. Now, y'all know Jason. He said, we want our families happy, healthy, safe, and nearby, and that's about educational opportunities, business opportunities, and good communities. It's not about handouts. And so I would say, and I rarely do this, my people don't want handouts. We want a path for opportunity. We want to understand how systems work so that we can take advantage of them like so many other people have historically, right? And I think that's one of the things that's one of the reasons why we're losing folks. As Democrats, what are we offering communities of color other than handouts? And I know I'm painting with a really broad brush, and I'm perfectly okay if somebody gets offended by that. But at the end of the day, this is wake-up call time. And I think our attitudes have to shift a little bit. We can't look at folks who are downtrodden economically or otherwise and say, oh, poor them. We have to look at them and say, how can we help lift them, pick them up without handing something down?
Now, I think I'm glad you made that distinction. That extremely important. I want to take this opportunity to open it up for questions that any of you may have for our panelists, and we can keep this conversation going. David? Yeah.
Thank you, and thank you guys for everything you're saying. And I'm just so glad to be here with you because it's everything you're saying feels exactly like where I was coming to, and I just, I'm grateful to sort of hear you saying it out loud. But then also there's the practical side, right? And so I'm in New Hampshire. I'll just use our example. We are a volunteer legislature. A lot of our folks have other jobs. We are slimly staffed. Everybody runs for everything every 2 years, so we're constantly just fundraising out of the same little pool. How can we be a part of operationalizing, like building this genuine community in an organic way that's not unrealistic because our resources are slim and isn't contrived because it's organized towards an end? Like, what are just some practical suggestions you guys have? And I know you mentioned like a Habitat for Humanity Day, but I would just welcome your other thoughts on, how do we go about this in a really genuine way? And I come at it from I was a local elected official first, and so I have roots in my community. I know a lot of people, and when the organizers come to town every 2 or 4 years, I can find people for them because I know people, How can we ensure that that's the work we're doing? Because that's what our country needs, and it will yield results because people will feel connected to us. So anyway, I just welcome your suggestions.
You guys mind if I field this one? Yeah. These jobs aren't good jobs. I think we've all experienced this. They don't pay well. They're not staffed well. They're often unpaid. We have on our team at Civic Resolve, one of our teammates is a state representative in New Mexico, and she works really hard, and I'm an employer of a state representative, right? And it's a tough proposition for everybody involved, for the representative, for the employer, for the work. We have to change the quality of these elected positions, these public positions, and that is something we're taking on. Our Civic Resolve for the next 6 years is going to be working on understanding how to have that value proposition conversation with both voters and electeds, and also recognizing that if we want quality community members who have the capacity to serve the communities they're trying to represent, we have to change the nature of the positions. There's got to be, first and foremost, better pay. There's got to be support for women and mothers in these positions, because if we want those perspectives, and we need those perspectives on these policy decisions, we need to give them a way to be in the room to do so. The same is true for every other lived experience that we all value and want to see in this diverse conversation about what we need. And so That to me is like job number one, and it's the thing nobody wants to talk about or do, especially in political philanthropy. Like that's just not a conversation that's either easy or a short-term deliverable, which is why, for us, it comes back around to what are we trying to orient to in the long term, and are we willing to put in the work and lose time and again to get to that win that'll actually make that change happen. So I think that's like a very structural answer to your question, but a real one, and it's something that we're working with other funders to actually tackle. And then I also feel like, it's really easy to, we all work at scale in some way. But what's funny about that is I think it leads us to this idea that every action has to be huge. Because so many of us work in big environments, we think the big environment solution is always the thing. But it truly is. It's 100 interventions happening on a daily basis all day long, and you figure out what you have to contribute and where you have to contribute it, and you do that. And if we all continue to do that and continue to talk to each other and question some of these structures, I think we're going to work our way out of this position and be someplace very different in 4 to 6 years.
And I would just add the idea of that idea of the Habitat for Humanity or whatever it is, right? And particularly like in your caucus meeting, like do brainstorm a bunch of like not quite community service projects, but community service projects and calendar them out. And say, okay, as many people as who can come. New Hampshire, geographically, it's not an overwhelmingly big state, and so you could do it regionally. I mean, to literally have that just be part of what, and which is acknowledging that you have a job, and you're a legislator, and you have a life, and maybe a family, or not maybe a family, you have some version of a family, right? Even acknowledging that, don't kill yourself on it, and at the same time, giving people the opportunity to do this stuff is a gift. Because you feel better because you're doing something, they are seeing results. So that, like, really making that be part of who your caucus is, whatever, whether you're in a legislative caucus, whether you're on a county commission, integrate that into what you do.
Any other questions? Yes, over there.
My name is Sarah Tron-Garriott, and I'm an Iowa State Senator, and all of our polling was based on voter profiles. So I was supposed to win by 5 points, and I won by 24 votes. All of our voter outreach on the doors is based on previous voter history or folks who were registered to vote. My paid media was targeting certain targets within that universe. And so I'm wondering, how do we reach the non-voters who may show up? And how do we make use of the folks who did show up in this, see this as an opportunity to engage with them and educate them and involve them in our political messaging? I can't do any more civic engagement than I already do. My husband would kill me. I mean, I'm at every Eagle Scout ceremony and in the community, and just any opportunity I show up for the opening of an envelope. But it's, what are some strategic ways that we can reach out to these folks and make a connection, because I know we were missing those people.
So the fundamental principle I think that's really most important here is you got to start with the absolute basic, right? We want to govern. You cannot govern if you do not win, right? And we've identified the Achilles heel in the political left's political infrastructure, and that is we're paying attention to the same people we've been paying attention to for a really long time and only targeting the voters that we think are going to show up. We're doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. Why don't we go find the marketing firm that's selling for that company over there? Why don't we go find the non-political talent that isn't tied to a whole bunch of these contractors that we typically use? Right? Why don't we do that? There was a gentleman over here who talked about like a radical reorganization and radical infrastructure. Why don't we stop doing the same thing over and over again? Right? We have all kinds of talent that want to help us out. I can't tell you how many folks from media and entertainment that I've met going on around there, but I keep using the same political consultants.
And no offense to the political consultants in here, but it's a lot more economically viable for you to sell us as the politicians the same formula you've been selling us. So why don't you shift your formula and help us get elected so we can raise more money to pay you better in the next cycle? There's an economic model, right? See, it's all of us. Look, it's all of us, right? We all have to rethink what we're doing. We got our asses handed to us. And this is the time for us to be able to say, why in the world is it that we had lower turnouts? Why in the world is it that we feel so disconnected? Why in the world is it? And we keep looking and looking and looking, and we're like looking into ourselves and looking into ourselves and looking into ourselves. And it was the pollster who showed us, we're not looking out there. We're not looking out that window. We're looking in here, right? You cannot govern if you do not win. And we cannot win if we keep doing the same thing and listening to the same people over and over again. I bucked my folks really hard the first time I ran because they insisted that there was a study out of Harvard that said that Latino men with facial hair cannot get elected. And I got elected. And I told them that they could pound sand. I actually told them something a little less mixed company worthy. And because this is part of who I am, right? I don't have to go out there and sell myself as a Latino. I just got to show up looking like me. And that's enough, right? And so we've got to use our strengths, but we also have to get outside of our own bubbles, outside of our own. And always, 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 in my view, understand there is governance and then there is campaigning. And I think the president-elect understands that really, really well. We've heard 6 or 7 examples of him saying something that helped him get elected. Do we know what he's going to do? Folks, this is American politics. We're well motivated. We have high moral and ethical standards. I think everybody in this room wants to do what they say that they're going to do. But you can't do it if you don't get elected. And if we don't get elected, people will suffer. And unfortunately, I think we're going to see that unfolding. So we kind of rewire ourselves a bit, I think.
I think it's also, when you talk about governing, we elect all of you fantastic leaders into these positions and then remove your ability to communicate or persuade much of anything to anyone, unless you go through a media that's increasingly weak and ineffective, or an email list and an inbox full of political fundraising emails. And then we expect our leaders to lead, go make something different and new happen without being able to persuade or communicate to your audience that you can do it. I think that's an impossible position we're putting so many elected leaders in, especially at the local level, where there's less of a megaphone. I think there's an opportunity to be innovative with how philanthropic support, even political support, can be a partner in communicating to the communities that you serve. One of the things that I worked on in the past was, recognizing that we wanted cities to build more mobility infrastructure and bike infrastructure. We offered cities resources to persuade and communicate to the neighborhoods where their roads would change if the cities would pay for the change in road design. And it was a great partnership because the mayor for the first time felt like he could communicate why, we wanted to remove parking spots and lanes of travel and how that would serve the future of that space. And we felt like we had a partner in him who's going to go do the hard thing. And it led to building 400 miles of bike infrastructure in 5 cities in 2 years because we removed the impossibility of communicating and persuading. And so I think that's another opportunity for a lot of elected leaders to look at what's in their backyard and ask themselves, is there a way to be a partner in a policy change or a service to the community that could actually benefit from outside dollars helping make that value proposition happen?
And I want to add, again, I realize how self-serving this is. Change the way we let people vote. I mean, the difference between literally every person having a ballot in front of them, where it's easier to vote than it is to not vote, because you're reminded when it comes in, right? Think about all the ways that our lives have changed, about the things we do at home now, right? During the pandemic, our kids went to school at home. Many people in here, when you're working from home. You're getting DoorDash. You're buying your groceries. You're buying your things. Let's transition that to voting at home, to putting that in front of everybody. Then you're going to have fewer of those folks you're going to be able to access every one of those people who are supposed non-voters are still going to have a ballot in front of them. And so there's going to be even more motivation to do that that broader communication. And I know that we're getting the hook from the back of the room, I think.
Yeah, I was hoping we'd have time for a couple more questions, but unfortunately we ran out of time. Thank you all so much. This was a really, really great, productive conversation, I think. Thank you.
Thank you guys so much for that. No. Nope. As you exit stage left, thank you all so much for that really inspiring, really important conversation. Stay where you are. We are it's really my honor and pleasure to introduce our last speaker before we break for lunch. I feel like we've been talking all morning about leaders and leadership and what we need to do to be successful. We've been focusing on things like communicating simply, communicating effectively around a unifying language, breaking down complex issues so people can understand it, being willing to talk to people that don't agree with us and how to persuade them that they might actually be with us, how to talk to people so that we can show them that government works and help restore faith in government. And when I think about all those things, there's actually one singular figure that I know that has been through New Deal who does this better than anybody else, and that is, don't applaud yet because I'm not done, Secretary Pete Buttigieg. And so, when I think back to when he was a New Deal leader starting in 2012, and he was in these chairs sitting and participating in these conferences, and he was bringing ideas forward like smart sewers, about revitalizing South Bend, Indiana from an old economy to a new economy. He actually was an Ideas Challenge winner for an open data portal that many of you have now participated in. And I think about the impact he had on so many of his fellow New Deal leaders here. And now fast forward to that same kind of special gift that he has brought to the federal government, both in terms of the most effective communication, but also in terms of all the things he's done for our country, in terms of getting our supply chains back online after COVID, the National Roadway Safety Act, the procedures, and of course, shepherding the implementation of the bipartisan infrastructure deal. So it is absolutely just like with the greatest honor and pleasure that I am so grateful that he's come back to talk to us today. And regardless of what happens in the next election, I know that his legacy will live on for generations to come of what he's done as Secretary of Transportation, and also that his voice will be a really important one going forward in the future as we continue to have these conversations we were having this morning. So I'm going to welcome two people to the stage. We're very thrilled to have with us Simone Sanders Townsend, a dynamic, charismatic, thoughtful journalist and TV host, friend of New Deal, to interview Secretary Pete Buttigieg.
As the secretary, we were standing in the back, I said, "You're a success story." Secretary Buttigieg, ladies and gentlemen, he is going to give some brief remarks from the podium, and then we will be in conversation.
Great. Well, first of all, thank you, Simone, for lending your voice and your mind to this gathering. And thank you so much to the New Deal, not just for having me now, but for everything that this organization has meant to me over the years. I really think I would not have had the chance to do what I'm doing now, and so many of the things I was proudest to get to do were it not for some of the friendships that I formed here. First of all, finding a group that was actually enthusiastic about talking smart sewers with me was a revelation when I was a new mayor. And then when I got it into my head to seek the DNC chair role, and many, many moments since then, I've turned to the people of this organization again and again for ideas, for nourishment, and frankly, the moments I remember best and found the most helpful in this group often came after regrettable political outcomes. So I'm especially glad to be with you right now. And by the way, if I'm tiptoeing on any of those, anything related to that, it's only because I'm behaving as a member of the administration and not here in a partisan role. But the first thing I wanted to talk about is that our work is not done. We have 2 more months. I just did a press conference at DCA, reminding folks that we are experiencing the heaviest year of passenger air travel in American history. And right now, that has been coupled with the lowest rate of airline cancellations in about a decade. And we're working very hard to continue to take care of airline passengers and deliver consumer protections. We're working at a feverish pace on getting grants done, announcing awards to grants that are deserving and qualify in programs that our teams have been working through, and taking the grants that have already been announced and getting as many of them as possible to an award agreement and getting them obligated. And so many of them have been working with with the communities, the cities, counties, the states where you lead. We've got overall across the legislation about $570 billion moving. For our part, over 60,000 projects. One interesting thing about that is 0 out of the 60, I think it's 66,000 now and counting, 0 out of them was invented in the US DOT headquarters in Navy Yard here in Washington, D.C. All of these were brought to us by communities, by states, by transit agencies and airports. And so now that the funding is there, it will fall to state and local leaders to actually deliver them. But we're going to do everything we can until the bell rings to do our part to partner with those of you who are working on that. I remain convinced that the infrastructure law and the rest of President Biden's Investing in America agenda will eventually come to be known as the big deal. We've had the New Deal, the Fair Deal, the Square Deal. This is the big deal. And I'm... And one of the things I've said to my team in the last few days is this is not just a time to look back at what we have achieved, but we'll actually get to look forward at what is being achieved in the years to come. Because whether we are talking about auto workers in St. Joe County, Indiana, where I grew up, seeing a level of investment coming to auto manufacturing, which is more than we've seen since the Kennedy administration and would not have happened if not for the IRA, because it's related to electric vehicle battery production, or whether it's the bridges and the tunnels and the airport terminals and everything else that we're doing. Most of those are yet to come. And yes, I will, whatever I happen to be doing professionally, I will do my part to remind folks how those came about, since even during this administration, there have been plenty of folks who voted no on the funding who have not hesitated to claim credit for the projects. And if they're just rejoicing about the projects, then I will cheer them on. If they're claiming credit for it, then we have to have a little conversation. But whether we're talking about something like the tunnel under the Hudson River, that is one of the largest, most complex public works projects in America in our lifetime, or whether we're talking about 6-figure streetscape improvements that are going to save lives in a community, including many of your communities that have been wrestling with how to confront the crisis of roadway deaths in this country. All of these are adding up to a better life in this country. And I'm proud of everything we've done to deliver that, and you have my commitment. We'll keep doing that every day I'm in this job. I have gone out of my way not to contribute to the many, many takes that are out there on the big picture until I have done more thinking and more listening. But there are 3 things I'm pretty sure about that I want to mention because they pertain in particular to the kinds of leaders who are in a group like this. The first is something that I said 8 years ago, and I believe even more strongly now, which is in a complicated time for the country, our salvation will come from the local. Leaders who are at that local level, at that state level, engaging people who actually know each other and working on the basic delivery of the things that we expect of our government will, I think, be one of the most important, collaborative, reality-based and values-based sources of leadership in American society. And so you are all about to become even more important than you are. The second thing I'm sure of is that information is everything, and we are not that good at it. When it comes to staying abreast of the different ways in which people are getting their information, we've got a lot of work to do. And A Democratic official going on Fox News is an example of that, but that is just scratching the surface of what we need to do to find people where they are. Those two things, I believe, are related, by the way, because, for example, one of the few realms that is sometimes comparatively non-ideological and accessed by people from across the spectrum is something like local broadcast media, where a lot of you find your bread and butter work is done. But a lot of it's literally down to the neighborhood level. And we got to figure out how to take online conversations offline at scale. And while it is not obvious to do that, how to do that, that is something that through human history until about 15 years ago we all did. So we're going to have to find ways to do that that might on some level be a return to form, but on other levels entail information environment work that is unfamiliar to people who have taken a free press in a democratic society for granted. And so I also think we have a lot to learn from like-minded friends abroad. And the third thing that I will say is that we cannot be mesmerized by the worst things that we see happening. We will be inclined to react with shock by some things which are done precisely with the intent of shocking us. We need to move very quickly through the shock and condemnation into identifying what exactly has to be done. And that requires a more tactical mentality that, again, I think probably comes more naturally to people who have been in the trenches of state and local and county work than it does sometimes to leaders here in Washington. So with that, I will take my seat, but this is so nourishing and so refreshing and so encouraging to be with this group, and I'm really excited to spend a little more time together, so thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. You know, I thought I had some questions already and some notes, but I brought my notepad because I know you. And I was writing feverishly because I got some follow-ups. First, let me just start with your current job. You're the 19th Secretary of Transportation under the Biden-Harris administration. You have served the entire tenure of this. Yes, the big deal, the bipartisan infrastructure law, you had a big role to play in that in terms of its implementation. One of the, you know, I used to be a commentator. I used to be a Democratic strategist. One could argue I'm a pundit. One of the things the pundits say and have said throughout this this last, frankly, year and a half, not just the last 107 days or so, is that the impacts of this bill, it's just not felt. It didn't reach people. And I have heard some folks note that perhaps the administration should have pushed very hard to have the bipartisan infrastructure parts of this, as well as the care economy pieces. I wonder what you think. You're the person out there handing out the monies, okay, handing out the proverbial big checks, and these are very transformational projects.
Yeah.
It didn't seem to translate, one could argue.
So a few things I think are important here. First, the nature of infrastructure work is it takes a minute. Some of the projects we're doing, Hudson River Tunnel is a good example. If we work at warp speed, could be done in the 2030s. That's at warp speed. Now, look, some of the stuff, about 14,000 projects are already complete. But there are a lot, and the bigger and more complicated, the more likely this is, that take a while. So unlike the child tax credit extension, which was a good policy that we did, and by the way, that we'd still have if congressional Republicans hadn't blocked us, which reduced child poverty dramatically that next year, some of these things take longer. That said, they're already delivering value even before the projects are done because of the building trades jobs that are being created in building them, even if we haven't yet had the advantage of using them, if you're thinking about the new bridge or tunnel. A second thing that we were up against information-wise is, as one of my colleagues puts it, good news is no news. It's actually a lot harder to get attention on something that was uncontroversially and unambiguously good as whatever the hot controversy of the day, right? And the third thing is the nature of infrastructure is it's supposed to work. Some of you who I used to geek out on smart sewers, we used to talk about this here at New Deal, that the connection between philosophical commitments about the meaning of life and the delivery of good water and wastewater is that if we deliver water and wastewater well, you never have to think about it, which means you have more bandwidth as a citizen freed up for thinking about the meaning of life and whatever that means to you. So oddly, the better it goes, the less we're in the headlines. And yet we need to make sure Americans understand, especially as more and more of these projects come online, which inevitably, but from a political perspective.
The majority of them are going to come online in the next administration.
Yeah.
Kind of like what happened. And so, you know, the president-elect, this next administration is going to benefit from that.
Massive EV battery factories rising out of the prairie in Indiana and Kentucky and Kansas. Most of them are set to come online in 2026.
Oh, wow.
27, some of them 25. You're exactly right. A lot of these projects, most of these projects. Now, it's always the nature, just as mayors, you know, break ground on something and then their successor gets to cut the ribbon on it. You know, part of that's the nature of the beast. The reason I called these big projects the cathedrals of our infrastructure wasn't because I was looking for a poetic word to describe something big. It's because I was thinking about how, you know, cathedrals were often initiated by people who didn't even live to see them completed. And part of that's just the nature of the work. But mark my words, I will be there to remind folks who made sure these projects happened and who was in the way.
Well, I have an additional question about the projects, but how are you going to remind people? Where are you going to be? You have a new job you want to tell us about?
No, I don't know yet.
Well, I can break news and note that he will not be a fellow at the Institute of Politics at Georgetown, okay? Because Mo Elithi already asked.
I'm a big fan of that.
Big fan. I'm a fellow this semester.
I'm going to have a little distance between me and Washington most of the time for a little while.
Okay.
But I'm a big fan of the IOP at Georgetown.
Have you figured out what you'd like to do?
I have not. No.
Okay.
The only thing I've figured out is Chasten has a very long honey-do list for me. And I've got 2 3-year-olds who are just old enough to not only notice but care when I'm gone. And I'm really excited to be spending more time with them in Michigan. And I know that I will make myself useful later. I just don't know how.
Okay. I might ask again before we're done. Have you
if I figure it out in the next 10 minutes, I'll tell you.
Have you spoken to your potential successor about this role and advocated for, you know, any of the work that your team has done to be continued in this new with this new administration, with the new secretary?
Yeah, so I did reach out to him. We had a good conversation. I let him know that he has been named to the best job in the federal government, and he'll be, in my biased but accurate opinion, working with the best people in public service. Look, there's a strong tradition in our department of former secretaries rooting for the department to succeed, whoever's in charge. I have strong views about policy. I will continue to make them known to anybody who listens. It happened today at DCA, where we learned that some airline CEOs are hopeful that the next administration will be less passenger-friendly than this one.
They said you have engaged in over-regulation from their perspective. That, you know, this getting the people their money back when we sit on the tarmac too long. I've been radicalized by sitting on the tarmac too long. Let me just tell you. Okay?
All of us have been at some point.
I feel some type of way.
Yeah.
Do you feel like you engage in over-regulation?
No, of course not. We feel that we did the right thing. I mean, look, we have these authorities for a reason. Now, there are some authorities our department hadn't really picked up and used, but they're there. And to me, that means we not only are allowed, but are obliged to use them to make people better off. And I'll tell you, we get a lot of complaints, thousands of complaints about aviation. We haven't got a whole lot of complaints from passengers saying, you know, I'm really upset that you arranged for me to get an automatic refund when my flight got canceled. I was really hoping you would keep that money in the hands of the airline and make me fight them for 9 months to get a refund or give me these points I didn't even want. Nobody's ever written us and said, you know, this airline told me that I could get a trip to Hawaii if I signed up for that credit card that they make the flight attendants tell us about, and now I can't. And I really have come to realize that I was wrong to believe the airline in the first place, and it's really my fault as a customer. Right? Like, come on, like this. And by the way, again, I will, far be it for me to speculate on what the next administration will do, but if not in Washington, certainly in America, these are bipartisan priorities that like people want to see get done. And I might add, we are not finished.
What does
Just
that
saying.
mean you're not finished? Because let me just say, 66,000 projects, over $700 billion out the door. You were trying to get all of the money out the door. To be clear, out the door means awarded, but not necessarily check written or funds wired. You cannot guarantee, right, or maybe you can, I'll let you answer the question, but can you guarantee that the monies will continue to flow even after January 20th, 2025?
I can guarantee we're doing everything we can to make sure that they do. But look, the reality is a new administration is a new administration. Now, the more of those awards can be covered by a grant agreement, the better, because it is more difficult to withdraw dollars from something that the federal government has committed in writing to providing. But I also think, again, out around the country, communities that find that the administration, the federal government made a promise to them, and somebody tries to take that back, I think that kind of policy change will arouse a very serious response that would hopefully protect those funds.
What haven't you done yet that you are planning to do in these next 2 months?
Well, stay tuned. But, we're...
You're not answering none of my questions. This is how they feel on Fox News when Pete Buttigieg comes on.
We're working. We've got more awards to announce. 3 or 4 major programs where I think we can make the announcements responsibly before we're done. Just in the last 30 days, we've done almost 800 projects that have been funded, billions of dollars that we've been able to move. We're not stopping because of the political calendar. We are working on rules, including a rule that would require compensation for airline passengers. Right now, you can get a refund, but in many parts of the world, you get compensated for your time if it's clearly the airline's fault that you were delayed for an extremely long amount of time.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're working on a rule that could contemplate that. And several other measures that we think will either enhance a passenger experience or the safety of the traveling public.
I remember in November-ish 2020, after it was clear that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris had won the election, and there were many people that were talking about the jobs that they wanted and what they wanted to do. And there were some people, when they heard the inklings that you were up for some different things, but that after the fact, when you were going to be the transportation secretary, there were some individuals in Washington, D.C. that said, he doesn't even have an airport. He's a small town mayor. He doesn't even have an airport. Well,
people were saying that. Yeah,
you can respond to the critics. Is this a job that you asked for? 1, and then 2, why transportation secretary? One could argue, hindsight, looks like you had one of the best jobs. Okay. Out there, handing out checks, cutting ribbons, and the nitty-gritty of the stuff. Kind of reminds me of a job Joe Biden had when he was the vice president, handing out checks, cutting ribbons, giving people stuff. Sure did help him when he ran for president again. So just wondering why you wanted this job. I was gonna circle back.
Gosh. So I did not ask for a specific job from the president-elect. I knew that if he thought I could fit on the team, he'd let me know how. But I was thrilled when he did, and when he said this is what he wanted me to work on. Because even then, in our very first conversation about this, he said this is going to be a big era for American transportation. And he was right. Administration after administration. Honestly, one of the few times Donald Trump had me fooled when I was sitting in these seats was I actually thought he was going to do that infrastructure package he was talking about.
Oh, yeah, Infrastructure Week.
Everybody wanted, Infrastructure Week. Annual Infrastructure Week with no result, right? But I really thought they would do it, and they didn't. But I knew that Joe Biden would do it. And I was excited to be part of that. I think any mayor will tell you that transportation is part of the beating heart of what they work on. Public Works, in our case, we reimagined the whole streetscape of the core of our city. Back then, there wasn't an infrastructure bill, so I didn't get any funding from the Department of Transportation. They gave us a nice award, though, so I appreciated that. At least we had the moral support, which is something.
A for effort.
So I knew this was the kind of thing I wanted to work on. And frankly, I valued the fact that a lot of what we work on does not have an immediate ideological partisan valence. That everybody wants a better bridge, a better road, a better tunnel, a better airport experience. Now, don't get me wrong. Obviously, We had partisan fights over the fact that there are climate implications to every transportation decision, because the single biggest contributor in the U.S. economy to greenhouse gas pollution is the transportation sector. We had fights over labor, and not everybody was on board with our commitment to being the most pro-worker administration that there's ever been. We had all kinds of fights. I aroused a surprising level of controversy by suggesting that we should do something about the places where infrastructure was used to reinforce segregation. I imagined that desegregation was a pretty uncontroversial proposition, but that turned out to be a political fight too.
Like in Detroit, for example. is
Detroit,
one of the
I-375
places, yeah.
cuts like a gash through Black Bottom and Paradise Valley. And that were thriving neighborhoods in their day. And there's stories like that. This isn't just something that happened in a few places in the South. Detroit, St. Paul, Minnesota, Buffalo, one of the biggest projects we're doing, Syracuse. I mean, a lot of this is New York State. Nobody is worse off when we do that. There are healthy local debates about how to do it right, and that makes sense, because obviously there are communities that think twice when anybody says, we're here with federal transportation dollars and we're here to help, right? So we have honored that difficult local conversation. But I think it's unfortunate that that became a political football in Washington, because nobody is harmed by dealing with some of the harms of the past. Chinatown in Philly, the Vine Street Expressway. And that didn't happen like back in the 40s. They finished that in the 90s, and it cut Chinatown in two. And we're doing something about it. I'm proud of that work. But again, alongside that kind of work that got a lot of headwinds here in Washington, a lot of the work is truly nonpartisan in its nature. And having cut my teeth as a mayor, where famously there's no Democratic or Republican way to pick up the trash, I really enjoyed that.
You talked about your 3 things that you were sure about. We talked about one of those, information, and how people get it, and how folks should be communicating. You have to go different places and spaces. Your first was that in complicated times, salvation is going to come from the local level. You talked about reality and values-based solutions. The people in this room, and many people on the Zooms out there that are watching, they are wondering what this transition to a new administration will mean for them and their communities, how they navigate the changes in the federal government. But I think they're also wondering about these conversations that they're seeing playing out online. They're seeing playing out on cable television, if they're watching, on the podcast, if they're listening. About this, it seems to be this tug and pull between who people should be talking about and who people should be fighting for. What do you think? Who is working class in America to you?
Well, first of all, if anybody who regards themselves as working class doesn't think that we have their back, that is shame on us. We got work to do.
But who is the working class, I guess? Because some would argue that talking about working class people is code for white working class people. And I don't think we should assume who one is talking about when they use the term. And I was struck by the fact that middle class, working class didn't find its way into your 3 things. I think that was intentional, because I find you to be quite intentional when you speak. So
look, there are certain middle class is thrown around in political rhetoric so often that I think it's lost most of its meaning. And for every time we've overused the term middle class, though I'm proud of the record that this administration has in supporting the middle class, not least by supporting workers. And I would add, supporting opportunities for people who were not prototypically considered to be part of union workforces, including more black and brown workers and more women, not just through kind of moralizing and browbeating, but by making sure there's a child care center at a work site so a working mom can get there, or by engaging the local unions to create pathways into that union for people who had been left out. But anyway, for all that we use the word middle class, a word we haven't used a lot is poverty. And a lot of people are in poverty. They are poor or low-income Americans, white, black, brown, who don't know if we have their back. And that's a problem. The last time I checked, there's not one county in America where somebody working on minimum wage full-time can actually afford an apartment. We've got work to do. And that's not just the information environment. We definitely got work to do in the information environment. We have substantive work to do to count on the people, to take care of people who count on us, who count on government to help address their problems. And the simple fact is, not enough people have felt that. And here's one way to think about it. There's imagine two different citizens who have been skeptical of us on the economy. Citizen one sees us talking rightly, proudly about all the jobs we created and the fact that we're handing to the next administration an economy with 2% inflation, 3% growth, and 4% unemployment and 5 to 6% interest rates. Not a lot of administrations have gotten that on the way in. But that doesn't help them. They are not part of the average whose real wages have gone up, even accounting for inflation. They are not they were hoping to buy a house, and it's not happening for them anytime soon. And so they're pissed, right? That means that for all of the great policy things we've done, not all of that has caught up to them. Now, I can give you all the reasons why. That voter will be better off when we continue our industrial strategy, continue creating jobs, continue to raise wages, and if we had a chance to do things like have insulin at $35 not just be for seniors, be for everybody. Do things like make sure there's actually paid family leave in this country, right? I can give you all the list of why we're the right answer. But they may well be skeptical of us because of results, and that creates a policy or a delivery problem for us. Compare that to citizen number two. It's all hypothetical, but imagine a citizen number two who, if you ask them how their economy is doing, she'll say, oh, I'm great. I got a raise. I'm definitely better off than I was 5 years ago. I'm expecting a promotion, and I'm about to buy a house. She's happy with her personal economy. And also is among the 50% of Americans who believe that unemployment is at an all-time high right now. In that case, that's an information problem. Did you all know that was true? Yeah, roughly half of America believes that unemployment is at an all-time, or at or near an all-time high. So why does somebody think that? Do they think that because they're actually citizen number one, and when they hear unemployment, what they really mean is just my economy and my economy sucks? Or are they citizen two, who actually thinks their own economy is great, but see a lot, aren't getting media from sources that report the fact that unemployment is in fact at its longest level of being low in peacetime I think since long before I was born, right? How we respond to those two challenges, each of which is very different, I think is a big part of what we have to do going forward and have to get right.
This is one of the best answers I've actually heard on that issue, so,
Thank you.
I'm gonna clip this one for the streets.
Uh-oh.
Before, the streets might have already clipped it, sorry, if I'm being honest. I guess lastly, if you had to give, because look, I know you're like, we gotta listen, we gotta talk, local leaders. I think there's a lot of people that agree with you. I personally would agree with you on that. I think there's a lot of listening that needs to be done still before ways are charted forward for a lot of people that I used to work for and in that party. However, folks want answers now. Decisions are going to be made now. The mayors across the country, the local leaders across the country, they have to make decisions right now about how they are going to engage. What are the two tangible things you would tell them?
I would say it all comes down to the politics of the everyday.
What does that mean?
It means, before we even get into it politically, I will just say philosophically. If you back all the way up, at least if I do, the point of all of this is to make somebody's everyday life better. And that's true whether we're talking about literal bread and butter issues, and by literal, I mean, agriculture policy, or whether we're talking about what is classed as social issues, but the reason it actually matters is it matters in somebody's everyday life. Nothing is more kitchen table for me than the fact that when I'm at my kitchen table, my husband and 2 children are there with me, right? That's not some abstract social theory commitment to me. That's our kitchen table. But what all of those different things have in common is they're about everyday life and how it gets better or it gets worse based on the decisions that people in big white buildings in Washington, D.C., and much closer to home in City Hall, and everywhere in between, make. And we have to orient our practice around that. Our rhetoric, of course, but also our work. And not get caught up. And one of the many reasons I think salvation will come from the local is it's easier to not get caught up in all the games that are played around here when you are accountable to the constituent who stops you at the grocery store, or when you yourself, because local leaders and officials eat what you cook because you are by definition residents and citizens of the places where you lead and govern, actually realize, oh yeah, there is a problem with trash pickup because my trash didn't get picked up. I better call my public works department and see what's going on, right? Like staying oriented to that is absolutely consistent with our values, our philosophies. But it reminds us that what matters about our values and philosophies is how they cash out in making people's lives better, not the other way around. And it will be especially difficult to do that given all of these shiny objects that will be cast before the American people on an exhausting hourly basis for the next many years, as they have been for the last 9 years or so. Because that's going to keep going. And sometimes they'll do something that you have to respond to. Like morally, you have to respond, and yet you cannot let it dominate the agenda. And there will continue to be examples of people who figure out how to navigate the toughest issue. Sarah McBride, remember elected in Congress, right? New Deal leader, I knew it, right? So figured out how to make very clear, like, what they're doing is wrong, but like, that's not what I came here to fight over. I came here to fight for my constituents. So even though what they're doing is wrong, that's not what I'm about right now. And it didn't give any ground to people who are doing something cruel and wrong. But also reminded everybody that they're the ones who are worried about where other people go to the bathroom. She's worried about how to make life more affordable for people who live in Delaware who elected her and sent her to Congress to deal with that. And put them on the defensive. Let the Speaker of the House of the United States of Representatives, not some high school model Congress, but the actual United States Congress that writes the laws that we all have to live by, explain how in a country that has crises ranging from the character of its democracy to the affordability of its housing, why he is spending 1 second of his time policing where one of his congressional colleagues gets to go to the bathroom, right? That's the politics of everyday life, and that's what we got to get back to.
Let me also just say, I think the culture wars for the current Republican Party apparatus, they are in fact the playbook, but they're also a distraction. And maybe an understanding of that would make a lot more people better off in how they fight the good fights and the real fights in this country. Secretary Pete Buttigieg, it's just been so lovely to chat with you. 19th Secretary of the Department of Transportation, ladies and gentlemen, New Deal alum, Secretary Pete Buttigieg. Thank you for your time.
Well, that's a tough act to follow. It's lunchtime, everyone. We have a couple of